Let's double check. So we're muting so they can hear us.
Enable the video.
Can you enable the video on this phone?
How are you doing, Nidara?
I'm doing well, Dan. How are you?
I'm okay. Well, oh boy, we have sound coming from the Zoom. We've had technical difficulties for the past 2 days.
And yet here we are at the closing session. But you know, Dan, there's another double audio. We'll fix it. We're problem solving and troubleshooting.
Which is better than problem shooting and trouble solving.
Right?
Is it?
It's fantastic. Okay, well, Dan, so I heard there's been a forum that's happened over the last 2 days.
There has.
Do you know anything about
I
it?
know a couple things about it. So there have been about 200 people gathered from all over the world working in like 7 tracks on global governance innovation and environmental governance, and that's it, I think. No, human rights and participation and global economic financial architecture. So we've been here for the past 2 days trying to prepare for what I hope is going to be a wonderful summit of the future with a couple other summits in advance. We've had some really excellent participants. Do you know who any of them are?
I do know who many of them are. We're going to go through several co-leads who will present their thematic work today. One of the things that I heard happened in this forum, I wonder who thought of that, was that the co-lead teams each constituted one young person, one civil society member, and one think tanker who led on each of the 7 thematic tracks. They've been working across 2 days, 2 very hectic, very busy, very caffeine-fueled days, both online and in person, to provide us with some roadmaps to recommendations. So really answering the question of how.
So we're trying to do this in a little bit of a talk show style, a little bit less formal, so we can actually enjoy each other's company, maybe smile. We do a lot of serious work here, but we don't always have to be so serious. We're allowed to enjoy each other, be creative, laugh a little bit. And thank you once again to those who've joined on Zoom. I did from my office where I was perched all alone this whole afternoon, a little bit crying, but it was very nice to hear all of the lovely things that were taking place in here, report back from multiple generations, all of whom agreed that we need to think about future generations, from regional forums, which reported from 5 different regions, the Pacific, Asia, that's 2, it's Asia and the Pacific, independently. We had Europe, Africa, South America, and one little bonus at the SDG regional platform. This may be news to Javier and Rosario, but the side event proposal for a sort of a regional futures forum at the SDG regional gathering in Santiago has been approved today. So there will be something happening there in April. Congratulations, Javier. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So what are we going to do this afternoon, Nidara?
So as you can see, we're doing our little bit with the talk show, but we are going to, you know, it is serious business that we've been working on these last couple of days, and we really want to showcase that. So a couple, you know, suggestions, strong suggestions in terms of housekeeping so that we can in fact get through all 7 thematic tracks. We're going to start with opening remarks from Ambassador Anche from the German mission, to be able to sort of give us a little bit of a roadmap of the Summit of the Future process in her capacity as co-facilitator. And then we will bring on the 7 thematic tracks. So when we call on your 7 thematic tracks, we'll introduce the co-lead that will be presenting for that track and the 2 respondents. If you can please take your seat in our talk show setup, and then provide, please, sort of brief. The co-leads will provide sort of a 5-minute overview of what's happened for the day. And we really appreciate the respondents provide sort of genuine on-the-spot responses to what they've heard, what they think might be feasible or not with the 2-minute mark. We're going to continue our little talk show skit with that, and we will give you a heads up when you have 1 minute remaining. And we will also tell you when time is up. We do kindly ask that you respect that timing in order to respect the space for others who will be coming after you in the session, because we do really hope to close on time. So with that said, we will go ahead with kicking this off, and we're very proud and honored to welcome Her Excellency Ambassador Antje from the Permanent Mission of Germany to the United Nations and co-facilitator of the Pact for the Future and the Summit of the Future in 2024. So Ambassador, over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, and I'm really glad that because here, also for those who are online, you can really feel an energy in this room. It's not palpable or seeable that you have been here 2 days, or it's already the second day afternoon. They all look, and I probably you see it on the screen. They all look very energized. I'm very glad because I think that is the support Neville Gertzer, the Libyan PR, and me need, and myself need for kind of support for this preparatory process. You know better than me that we have been kind of appointed here for this DA. But everybody also knows that 24 is the real work is standing before us and lying ahead of us. So Guy Ryder was here yesterday, I suppose, and he will have told you that there is one issue we really have in the next months to overcome, that is the trust issue. The trust issue in the membership, that the membership is convinced that this is something they all can rally behind, that next year will be not distracting from this year's big central event, which is this SDG summit. And we heard from the Irish colleagues who were present yesterday, that is a very important point. The relation between SDG summit, implementation of the SDGs, and what does it mean for the content and also for the process of the Summit of the Future. Our Common Agenda, like many of the papers you have been producing on the Our Common Agenda, the Our Common Agenda has been here for a longer time, you know, before the Russian aggression against Ukraine, before a rising in I would say, international tensions, you know. Things are here a bit kind of concentrated in the eyes, especially of the Global South, and I think that's a good basis to improve the implementation of the SDGs. This is what they want to have as a result of the SDG summit, of course, but also they expect the Summit of the Future content-wise to deliver on the SDG implementation. So very much we depend on the results. You have read probably the stimulus package paper of the SG, who is demanding 500 billion for the implementation of the SDGs, who is demanding a dramatic change in financial architecture. So there is a lot at stake, and it's not only kind of the issues we have now with the lack of finance, lack of governance, lack of maybe also political will that we face with the SDG implementation. It's on top of this, the issues we intend to tackle in the Summit of the Future that are, as you said, are embracing and taking into account the interests of future generations, not even only the youth, but generations that are not yet born. So next year will be the year where we look at the implementation of the SDGs, and we have to, until this September, agree on an agenda for the summit, which will, of course, be peace and security, which will be climate and environment, which will be economy development, and which will be human rights and kind of social cohesion in a situation where we all see that the big issues, both the climate change and or the climate crisis or catastrophes that are lying before us, but also the digitalization, will demand from the international community new answers. So this is the situation. Building trust is, I think, this year's task of Neville, of my co-facilitator, or both of the co-facilitators. And we have been using the method you may have seen, that we try to have a one-to-one approach. So we have on every issue, on every consultation, we are scheduling. We have one part for the stakeholders. So 3 hours for the stakeholders, 3 hours for the member states. And we will continue that until September. Then we will have a scope. And we will try to have a unity and agreement between member states on the scope of the Summit of the Future. And then we will try to, I think, negotiate starting from February next year on concrete issues. Because this year, I mean, you all have seen, it has been postponed from 23 to 24. Nobody wants to negotiate things twice. Also, yeah, because we would have to do that if you tried to negotiate this year. So we are not doing this, and we are doing this next year. Also, we use this year for understanding the gist of the policy brief proposals of the Secretary General. They are quite different. I mean, emergency platform is something that is reacting to the pandemic, is more like a methodology proposal. It is not kind of, it could be complicated in terms of financing accountability and who really is reporting to whom and so on. This is always touchy, but it's not comparable to the big issues like, for example, language and peace, which will be a paper where we try to grasp the mood in the membership on how to deal with the fact that since 2013 we haven't had a new peacekeeping mission, that we need ever more money and also political will for peace building, where we want another approach of prevention. Then we also have, of course, the climate action. The whole issue of climate justice, climate financing, is coming up with a very big speed. And then there is, of course, the other more institutional issues. And I think there has to be, in the end, a package that is tackling all those challenges. And for there is something in it for everybody. It cannot be something where only the south wins or the north wins, or is more kind of. Also, this is not the concept what we have here. In the United Nations, we have formed a balanced approach. So the more voices we hear from the stakeholders, from the civil society, from private partners, from even individuals with well thought through proposals, they can be also bold and maybe not doable. But this is not the point, because what we need is some investment, brain investment in the challenges of the futures, and not only from member states which of course are looking at their own interests, which is very much okay. This is how the world is. I just have one last mentioning that when we come sooner and we come closer to the summit, I think we might even need from you, and this will probably be rather after September. I mean, one highlight will be the high-level advisory board report we have end of April. I think you have seen there is nominated by the SG, led by Stefan Löfven, the former Swedish Prime Minister, and the former President of Sierra Leone, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, with 10 or other people. And they will present something which in their own right, and they can be more bold than I can be as a facilitator or a member states in general can be. So this will be one highlight, but after that, I think we need also maybe some suggestions from your side on how to continue with the stakeholder integration in our proposals, maybe during at least when we start with the negotiations, whether there will be points where we have additional conferences or so. I heard from some of you, I knew from the virtual consultations that the virtual way is not bad. It's good because nobody has to travel and waste emissions and so on. And this is of course good. And we have a broad public then we can reach. But I think there has to be some concept also for in-person or maybe even virtual things we do where we bind together on scope, where we not do only one issue, but we do the whole of it, a more holistic approach. So I stop here. This is all I have to say because, as I said, and you may have seen the roadmap, it will be we will be adjusting it, but there will be until September another 5 or so meetings, and we of course follow very closely what the SDG co-facilitators are doing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Lehn. And I'm told that your name is difficult to pronounce even for Germans. So my apologies that I'm sure I have misspoken somehow, but we are very grateful to you and to your fellow co-facilitator for your openness, for the opportunities you've given us to participate. It's an original format. You know, there's always going to be challenges, regardless of how you organize participation. For example, if it's only in person, then you don't get that remote, from the grassroots perspective. But then if it's only remote, then you don't get that interaction, informal interaction. We're working through it, and I think that the positive relationship that you demonstrate here and that you have demonstrated with us over the past few months is something that we look forward to building on. And again, we're grateful to you and your co-facilitator as we do this. So what we'll kindly do is ask those who are on this table to return to the audience. We can't give away gifts like they do on some talk shows. But if we could, you just look under your seat and you have a car key or something. But that's not the case today. So the way it's going to work, as was articulated, is that we have one representative from each of the tracks, and then 1 or 2 respondents to that individual. So the first track that we're going to bring up is UN and Global Governance Innovation. So we have Rita Shah, who's the CEO and founder of UMA, a women empowerment group and a member of Democracy Without Borders. So if you could just come up here. And then the respondent we have is Ambassador Liu, who's ambassador to the United Nations for Management and Reform in the United States of America, which is a small country very close to where we are now. And I will say, and Ambassador Liu knows this, that a lot of the format that we have been doing over these past 2 days is actually thanks to him. We've had a number of conversations where he keeps saying, but what is the how? What is it that you want us to do? Yes, but how can we make it happen? And so we've tried to organize, as you know, because I've been saying it for 2 days now, we've been trying to organize it from getting away from solely the what, which is the backseat driving, to the how, which is actually taking the wheel and figuring out where to go. So now we'll hear from Rita. We have Rita and Ritika who are both presenting, so my apologies. So we'll hear from Rita first on some of the proposals from the UN Global Governance Innovation track. Please, you have about 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for having me here. Hello, everybody. And thank you to those of you who are on track 7 and in the forum that I was co-chairing earlier with Andreas today. So, in quick summary, out of lots of proposals that we received, we had 5 that really, really stood out to us. And those 5 were, and I'm just going to give you a very quick summary for each of those. The first one, and all of them are very, very important in their own right. So the first one was for an independent and qualified UN Secretary General. So really having a Secretary General for a single term, a push for reform to really, really think deeper into who that Secretary General could be. Could it be somebody who is a woman, for example? Could it be someone from a different background? Could it be someone who isn't from your traditional governmental background, but more from a citizen perspective? That could really be somebody that to think about. So that has a bit of discussion around that. Then the next one I wanted to mention was the proposal for creating for Article 109, the Charter Review Conference. Now, this is something that has been quite topical, not just now, but actually for quite a while now. And in really, really summary, it's really for this purpose that the Charter Review Conference, according to 109 of the UN Charter, would be convened to determine an appropriate date for a conference to commence to really, really discuss this and actually further this going forward. The other 3, and this is why I've saved these to last, is one thing we noticed in our track is there was a lot of commonalities between the other 3 proposals. namely creating a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly. So that would be where you would maybe perhaps get a couple of folks from member states put forward, one from a majority viewpoint, one from a minority viewpoint, to have different viewpoints exercised there. The other one would be creating an instrument for a UN World Citizens Initiative. So this is where everyday people like, you and I, not necessarily folks that you would normally expect to see when it's at the UN General Assembly, to come and exercise their views on what they think they would like to change in the world around us. And then the other one linking from that is actually creating a UN civil society envoy. So something that can really help carry a wider reform agenda to open up the UN system for civil society. Now, the reason I bring these up is because these three in particular, we felt that could be something that we could join forces on. There are lots of similarities. While the first two tracks I mentioned, we think are very vitally important and must be furthered as well, those could potentially be furthered via existing tracks in future summits such as this to take forward. But the other three that I mentioned could potentially be something that we want to take forward as a way forward. So how do we take forward? I know my wonderful colleague sitting next to me is going to be asking me that question. So one of the ways for doing that and determining that roadmap is to say, well, you could have, for example, a group of friends put together, folks from this room here today, for example, could be part of this group of friends, all part of an existing society. There are various that are already in existence, such as the We the People's campaign. A group of friends, in effect, would be really kind of an inclusive global governance formed, as example, from member states, where you could have folks from different backgrounds coming together. So far, we have some interest from our Danish friends, from Costa Rica, as well as from the Maldives, I understand. And we would love to get a lot more interest from other countries. 1 minute remaining as well. So one thing I wanted to mention, that in order to move this forward, we have to kind of find a way of actually coming together to find out what is our group goal. Can we form this group of friends? We were also asked to combine this and the relevance to the UN's SDGs. And actually, these three proposals I mentioned have a lot in common with SDG number 4, so quality education, gender equality, number 5, number 8, decent work and economic growth, number 10, reduced inequalities, number 16, peace, justice, and a strong institutions, and number 17, partnerships. So this is something that we believe, and track 7 is something that we can actually further and actually turn actions into words. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Ambassador Wu, what are your thoughts in response?
Dan, thank you. And thank you to all of you for being part of this process. On behalf of the United States, I just want to tell you we're thrilled to be here. We are all in when it comes to the SDG Summit. We're all in when it comes to the Summit for the Future. And as the German PR said, there's been a delay in the Summit for the Future. We would have, I think, preferred to go a little bit sooner, but that's okay, because I think this process we're having right now, before we get to negotiations, is important to solicit the kinds of ideas and creativity that's happening right now in this room and virtually as well. So I think this is important. And it's not just to get the good ideas, but as she said, it's also important to build the trust. This process is set up for multi-stakeholder input. And I applaud the German PR as well as all of the other co-facilitators for really building that into the process. And thank you to the facilitators, because I think because I think the ideas that you all are generating through sessions like this will be incredibly valuable. As Dan said, I have a lot of thoughts on this, more than the time they'll give me. But when I've done these sessions before, I've always told people, think big, but think practical. And I know that seems odd, but I think the problem we often have in the UN is we just continue to set higher and higher goals, but no one ever figures out, like, how do we actually accomplish these goals? And that's why I love the ideas that are on the table right now. And so just a couple of instant reactions. They actually didn't give this to Dan, so I was just scribbling sitting here. Number one, in terms of the SG, unquestionably, the next SG should be a woman. It's just I realize that sounds like a cheap applause line, but it unquestionably should be a woman, and it unquestionably should be. And well, I'd say it would be great if we started looking for people from different backgrounds as well. That being said, it is an intergovernmental institution, and so what you are trying to do is to get member states through their governments take action. So there is obviously a built-in advantage of a former government official who understands that, but. Yes, just strictly in terms of the diversity, and that has to be the case. It should be the case. The second thing, in terms of the Article 109 UN Charter Review Conference, I think it's a great idea as well. And I'd simply say, as part of overall UN reform, President Biden has charged us to leading the process on reforming the Security Council. So we're involved right now in a set of consultations with member states on what that means. That's obviously a big part of, I think, what many people perceive as the dysfunction or the inability of the UN to act, particularly right now in the middle of a war. And so not only Security Council reform, but I think in general, when it comes to security issues, giving the General Assembly more of a say in those matters. That can all be institutionalized within a charter review. I would also say, it's going back to the SG, the one thing I would frankly like to see more is more power given, more authority given to the SG as well. I mean, we have seen very dramatically in the course of this war, the SG's efforts in terms of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And that's been a really heroic effort that is getting fertilizer, it's getting grain out of that region and helping a lot of people who would otherwise be starving right now. And so that really should be a model of more initiatives that the SG could take. And again, I don't know if that needs to be changed through a review conference or if the member states need to agree, but that would be another important thing as well. And then finally, in that final bucket of the last three items, which are really about how do we get more diverse viewpoints into the UN, I think that makes sense. I mean, this is a member state driven organization, but member states don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And I think creating more mechanisms for civil society, for average citizens to weigh in is important. I think where I will challenge all of you as well, because I'm not just supposed to pat you all on the back and say this is great work. I think in addition to providing more viewpoints from civil society and stakeholders and average citizens into the UN process, how do we make the work of the UN more actionable and create the momentum and impetus for the action within member states? Yes, the UN does tremendous work through the agencies in terms of development work, humanitarian work, but so much of the actual implementation of something like the SDGs can only happen when 193 countries take the initiative and really make it a priority. So how do we, as the UN, better engage the citizens, whether it's in the United States or the Global South, to really make this part of their national agenda? So the information flow should not flow from citizens to the UN, but really from the UN back to citizens. So that's one thought as well. And the other thought I'd simply just throw on the table, whenever we talk about whether it's our common agenda, reform ideas, it's always, what more can we give the UN to do? It would be a fascinating question. What should the UN not be doing? And I simply frame that not again, and I simply say that in terms of the practical. We know that the needs of the world are greater than the resources, and that's not just humanitarian needs, development needs, climate change. Either we need more resources on the table, and that's actually something to consider as well. How do we mobilize more resources from other than member states? Or how do we better refine what the UN does so that we really focus on the highest priority problems? If everything is a problem, then really nothing is a problem. And I think, you know, to the extent, as I read our common agenda, I think it's a remarkable document, 80 pages of just kind of laying out the world's problems. But what it doesn't necessarily do is prioritize among those problems. I understand that's intentional because, you know, someone else's second tier problem is someone else's first tier problem. But I think just given the constrained resources we have, I do think that prioritization needs to happen at some level throughout the UN. So thank you for letting me be part of this. This is a great process, and I look forward to getting the downloads on the other tracks that you'll be discussing.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Louis. And I think you will see in other tracks that we do have issues related to finance. I mean, it's hard, for example, to give the Secretary General more power if he has no resources, no more resources. And then it's also difficult if the resources he has are exclusively from member states and not from other sources. So we are thinking about other ways to raise finance that, you know, if it's only member states paying for the UN, then it's a member state organization. If there are taxes that sort of are ascribed to human beings or transactional taxes or on airline travel, international travel, if those sorts of things also channel into the UN, then maybe the power that the Secretary General wields will be a little bit more democratic in a sense, because it will be more representative. There'll be less risk in a sense to interpretation or to the resourcing of well, her work going forward.
Yeah.
So I'll pass on to Jadar, sorry.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our speakers and for taking the time to join us and do the work that you are doing. I'm now happy to bring on the development track. So could I introduce our co-lead, Eliana Harbour, UNESCO SDG for Youth Network representatives, and GFF Action Track co-lead, Alicia Barcina, former Executive Secretary of ECLAC. I believe she's there somewhere. She's coming up. But also Dr. Adam Day, head of the Geneva Office Center for Policy Research, UN University, and a member of the Secretariat team for the High Level Advisory Board on Effective Multilateralism. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we'll have Eliane kick us off. Thank you, Eliane.
All right, so thank you, everyone. So regarding the development action track, we started our conversation by talking about how all citizens need to do better, finding ways to provide practical support, involving everyone, and investing in the right things. So our action track was divided into 4 sub-tracks. The first one is updating the SDGs or not, and we mainly agreed on that we need to keep them as 17 please, but the targets can be revisited, and we need to focus on the intersection between these targets and between the SDGs and also on ethics and values. The second subtract is about operational arrangements. So we need to find ways to reach people, including the less educated and not educated, so they can get to know more about what's happening and about the importance of coordination between ministries and civil society. And last, the importance of creating systems that we need to follow. The third one is institutional arrangements. We talked about including people and making them understand the impact of what's happening in their lives. And this will make them more involved in the process and take that more seriously. And we also talked about the role of education in this process and about creating accountability mechanisms. And the fourth one was related to GDP, whether it's really the indicator that measures or we need something beyond. And we discussed that this GDP can be, we can work on supplementing it to increase flexibility and maybe having the right indicators. We also had a quick breakdown for recommendation, which was involving people at the grassroots who have the knowledge, but they need the support so they can be able to provide more. For example, the youth groups, but we're not limited to the youth groups. And we think that this is the responsibility of the UN group country organizations to advise the government and localize the work. And this is long time overdue. And I want to bring 2 things that I believe into the spotlight. And this is something, first one, this is something I always say. The responsibility of creating a better tomorrow, no matter what track or field, is not one stakeholder's responsibility. It's a shared mission, a shared vision, shared planet, and shared humanity. And therefore, it should be a shared responsibility and shared action plan. It's not man, it's not woman, it's not young people, it's not seniors, not CSOs, not NGOs, not governments, it's all of them, connecting the dots, finding a common ground, and focusing for real genuinely on one target, which is better present and better future, and even better lessons learned from the past. And the second thing is generations are the outcome of all the things they learn and unlearn. Whatever we want to change today, if it's not integrated in school curricula, education systems, and also informal education setups, it will probably bring results, but won't be sustainable. Why is that? Because the ability to change is a skill that should be taught. in a way or another. At school, we need to, or in education, we need to learn that, and we need to have that embedded in the minds of the very young generation. And we need to teach these kids and these young people how to be able to bring this change and how to be able to contribute to the plan we have. And and this should be done in their language. And by their language, I don't only mean English, Arabic, or French. I also mean some sort of simplicity that can make them part of the conversation, no matter their age. And if we cannot explain our strategy to a 10-year-old, then probably the strategy that we are trying to work on has gaps. So we need to go back, revisit it, try to come up with some sort of a plan, and go back to these people. So sooner or later, they can join us to where we are going. And I know that while I'm speaking, so many schools around the world and education systems have already this in their systems and in their curricula, but this is not everywhere. There are so many places that are outdated. I come from a country where the curriculum was reformed the last time 26 years ago in 1997. This curriculum cannot prepare anyone to any future, and it wasn't even able to prepare us to the present that we are living right now. So my final word is education, because this is the root of the problem for me. Thank you.
So Alicia is not.
She's, I think, on the way.
Shall I
So please-
stall?
Yeah.
Do I need to do some pattern? No, it's so nice to be here. And as Nudara said, UN University has been supporting the high-level advisory board on effective multilateralism, which the German PR mentioned as one of the inputs to the summit for the future. And as I was looking through the various recommendations here, I actually think quite a lot of it is actually going to be reflected in what we're calling the HLAB, the High-Level Advisory Board report, and mentioning Article 109 earlier, and certainly greater inclusion for civil society and youth. There's a whole kind of section in that report that will be coming out in mid-April. And as I look through some of the other recommendation areas around the international financial architecture and others, I think that the consultations that this board did, including with many of the groups here, are hopefully going to be reflected more broadly across that. Just in this development area, I think one of the starting points for the high-level advisory board was actually the Secretary General's statement at the beginning of his first term about making the development system work for prevention. And certainly one of the recommendations that's here about setting up a global resilience council starts with the same analysis that the board has, which is really that our collective security is not put at risk just by armaments and military threats, but there's a range of social, economic, digital, you were mentioning some of the educational kind of threat multipliers that you could imagine, climate ones as well. And so I think the board's definition of security is one that resonates much more broadly than just military weapons. And that starting point for the board, I think, leads to a series of recommendations that they'll be making in their report. One of them is really that the system itself should actually make a normative statement recognizing that broader set of risks at the top. So you've got the Sustaining Peace resolutions from 2016 that do that, but really to start building that broader sense of risks. There could be other steps that could be taken, such as the UN's relationship with regional organizations could be based on that broader concept of security, looking at humanitarian human rights development as necessary for ensuring regional stability. There's a great report by the Olof Palme Commission in March of last year that lays out a pathway forward for that I think the board likes quite a bit. But then looking at one of the recommendations here, this establishment of a Global Resilience Council, one of the issues that the board looked at was whether the peace-building architecture of the UN could be expanded and strengthened to deal with some of those issues. Could you imagine a peace-building commission, that was able to deal with more directly with climate risks, more directly with digital risks, with unequal access to resources and other what the board thinks is global public goods. And this actually comes back to one of the recurrent points I had, which is every good idea that the board came across. Richard Ponzio had already published something on it several years before. And this is another one where the Gambari Albright Commission of 2015 had a proposal to upgrade the Peace Building Commission to a Peace Building Council, which is actually quite similar to one of the recommendations here about a Global Resilience Council. I think that some of those ideas are going to be echoed in the High-Level Advisory Board report, but certainly
that deeper question about how to broaden our sense of what how development can play a role in addressing instability. One of the things I noticed just in my last 30 seconds is that seems to be not in the recommendations around the financial architecture or in development. But I think that there is kind of a zeitgeist right now for thinking about how the international financial architecture could be remandated to be less about post-World War II reconstruction and more about investing in that concept of resilience or that deeper sense of what issues would need to be invested in to stop a slide into conflict. And I think that does get into some of the issues that you were raising about also investing in non-military approaches to security, investing in dealing with unequal access to goods and resources. So I was a little surprised actually not to see more of that, but I'm assuming that these were the recommendations that hit Ambassador Liu's call for being bold and also practical. So I'm going to come back for a second show around peace and security where I'll touch on a couple other of the issues.
Thank you so much, both Elliot and Adam, for giving us that sort of overview of what was happening. And just so you know, every time Richard Ponzio publishes a report, it's an entire team of people who have to do the work behind it. I just want to point that out.
There's a real idea people right about.
But most of the volunteers you see around this room are working on a publication that's currently. But thank you both so much. I think Alicia's on the way. If she sort of jumps in, we'll definitely make sure that she has a moment to join us. But thank you. I'll send you back to your seats until Adam will pull you back up later. Yeah.
Thank you so much. So the reason Adam is coming twice is both because we really love him and his perspective, but also because the HLAB report is being finalized, and there were a couple recommendations that were that need to be further integrated. And so some of his colleagues who are also going to join us, I think, are trying to cover that. So we are in the midst of things evolving. It's a really exciting time for this process. So now we're going to be flexible. We're going to learn to be malleable as a species and as a small community. And the order that you see in your program may not match the order that takes place based on those who are in the room. So next, surprise, is human rights and participation. So we have Ishan Shah, who will present on behalf of that track. He was just for the past 2 weeks the UK youth representative to the UN for the Commission on the Status of Women, which you might have heard about. We also have Alexander Sutzman, who's a minister and senior diplomat for the European Union delegation to the UN. And then we have Craig Mulcaber. He's the director and deputy to the ASG for Human Rights for the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights here in New York. So we are looking forward to hearing from you all. Ishan, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's great to see everyone still with us after 2 days. Thank you all so much for your active participation in the forum, and in particular in the human rights and participation track. And so essentially coming into this process, Jeff and I had the privilege of speaking to so many people on their recommendations, and we formulated 3 overarching recommendations, which are essentially around the protection and promotion of human rights, protecting human rights defenders, and strengthening civil society and youth co-leadership. And what was made abundantly clear in everything we were hearing was that human rights wasn't something that was just confined to our track, but it's something that should be and must be centered and integrated across all 7 tracks of this forum, of this process, but also at the Summit of the Future and its Ministerial Preparation meeting in September. When we're talking about the roadmap to get there, obviously human rights is a very broad issue, a very contentious issue. So we're still not quite there with a concrete roadmap, but we're working on it. We're looking at how 2023 to 2024 can be used as a time to almost trial the recommendations and those concrete actions that we're looking to see inputted, riding off the momentum of these different moments that are happening, particularly the SDG Summit. We have this preparation ministerial meeting for the Summit of the Future, and even the Generation Equality Midpoint moment, which will also happen in September too. When it comes to these specific proposals that we're discussing today, one of them revolved around the civil society focal points in the UN system, which we are told are meeting in a couple of weeks from now. And we're already thinking, how can we bring our recommendations to them in terms of looking at how we can influence the processes they're discussing, their terms of references, their decisions too. We're also looking at best practices, looking at processes like the Commission on the Status of Women, how they are really integrating civil society and youth participation, not only in this preparation process, but actually at the negotiating table too, and convening all of these best practices together to look at participation in a very broad term. How can we learn from these processes, but also how can we unlearn from these processes and grow together subsequently? The final point I'd like to make is on funding, resourcing, and capacity building. None of the work we do on advancing and protecting and promoting human rights can be done without sustainable, accessible, and flexible funding, but also funding that is gender transformative. Something that must be integrated throughout all of these tracks is a gendered lens and a gendered perspective, and that's something that's been made abundantly clear in the human rights and participation track. And beyond these concrete, tangible processes, we also need to look at more holistic concepts. What does co-leadership, co-creation, co-ownership mean when it comes to participation? How do we decolonize our approaches? How do we conduct a power analysis of these systems and structures and look at shifting those imbalances in power, in negotiating power, in decision-making power, and agenda-setting power? And what does accountability and transparency look like? And all of these fundamental aspects around participation and in the human rights track come from the basis of the Young Feminist Manifesto, which I implore you all to read and take into the spaces that you occupy. But that's the human rights track in a nutshell. We look forward to continued engagement with each and every one of you in this room, but also beyond these four walls, to all the people, especially young people out there who have really significantly contributed to this track. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's really a pleasure to be with you. And thank you for the introduction. I think what's beautiful, it was extremely political. And I think when we talk about human rights and participation, it's really at the core of how as political as the UN can be. It's really good to see you all here in person. I want to echo what the German ambassador said before. You feel the energy, and honestly, all these virtual consultations which we had to go through for UN 75 and leading to the our common agenda, it is not the same. And I think you are the first ones in line to experience that when somebody is pushed aside, it is civil society. It's the first ones to be silenced, whatever the arguments are used, COVID or anything else. So it's good to be back. It's good to have you on board on the road to 23 and 24. And we're really all looking forward to what will be in the People's Pact for the future. And this is a good beginning to it. As European Union representative here, I feel, of course, extremely comfortable with this topic of human rights and civil society participation, because it feels that's what we are preaching all the time at the UN and what we're trying to channel and in a way mainstream all over the place. But I feel less comfortable about it when I see where it ends up very often in the processes and where the membership puts it. I mean, human rights are not a European topic. They're not a topic of the European Union. And the fact that you're all here from the South, from the North, shows that this is a universal issue and not something that only some in the global North should be seen as fighting for. So as such, this is again where I think you manage to merge the rifts that sometimes are artificially put up. It is well known that human rights is a pillar, one of the three pillars of the United Nations. What bothers me here too, it's always the third pillar. Why isn't it ever the first pillar? Why? I mean, it's not that we're competing with other issues, but it's so easy to say it's cross-cutting, it's everywhere. You know what that means. When it's a bit of everywhere, it's a bit of nowhere. So mainstreaming is good, but bits and pieces here and there, that's not good. That's not enough. And that's what you see. I mean, you see it from the OCA to the Summit of the Future. There are, of course, important matters, but then it's always the little appendix. You have a call for action on human rights, and we'll merge that somewhere in there. But no, we're not merging it the way we need. So I think maybe to merge it, I mean, we've said it, and your conclusions are great on this. I mean, you're talking about a system-wide coherence, a coherence between domestic agendas and global agendas. I mean, a strategy involving a meaningful participation and human rights that starts at home. And then, of course, it gets brought on the global stage. You mentioned training, also transformative in that sense, which of course matters. And we saw it. We saw it in other areas. We saw it last week with CSW, how much that matters. And of course, money, whether this is for the High Commissioner or for the treaty bodies or beyond, with the appropriate procedures and channels. And there again, we're lacking. Sometimes we have the feeling we know what needs to be done. The problem is, where's the political support? Where's the political will to do this, to get it really transformative. So I think we have to start doing that blending. I mean, between the OCA, the Summit of the Future, the SDGs, and remember, yes, human rights are everywhere down there, but they will not pop up miraculously and magically if actors are not at the center of doing it. And the actors, that's you, that's all of us as civil society, and those elected, non-elected. I think we have some encouraging examples. We saw it on youth and on children. I remember not that long ago, the resistance to include children's voices. I remember the resistance we had from some member states when we celebrated the Convention on the Rights of the Child to listen to children. Well, I think we've made progress, and youth, we've seen it with the creation of the youth office, etc. That's encouraging. It's encouraging issues, but we need that bold participation of civil society, of subnational entities, and it's great that the OCA calls for a network, multi-stakeholder, multilateralism. We need to include parliaments. For somebody who spent 20 years in the parliament, I think this is also a good conveyor, a good vector of what civil society brings up. And there are parliaments who are not afraid of taking civil society voices on board. So why does the UN not do that more? Just maybe an anecdote, there are good examples. Last week we had CSW. It was good to see people in the same room. You had executives from the executive government, you had members of parliament from different countries talking to dozens of civil society representatives. There was no fear, there were no taboos. That shows that this works. So let's try to have some leaders who lead by example on this. It's hard to achieve, but the co-facilitators showed us, I think, over those 2 days already, that they're happy to take those suggestions on board. So keep being vocal. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks. Excellent presentation, excellent recommendations. I'm really happy to see the breadth of these and the practicality of them as all. So I'll just say yes and, because I agree with everything you put forward, not least the doubling of the resources of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, which beyond all partisanship, I have to say it's an absolute scandal that 1/3 of the charter gets about 4% of the budget. And that's because, with all due respect to the member states in the room, member states put their money where their mouth is, don't put their money where their mouth is when it comes to human rights questions. And we really need a mobilization from civil society to push for the charter to do what the charter says it's going to do. But beyond the material resources, there's the issue of political resources, if I can call it that, which is we've had now for decades a slipping of the normative and mandate documents that the UN Human Rights Program relies upon. It used to be that if it was in Universal Declaration, if it was in the Vienna Declaration, the World Conference on Human Rights, later if it was in the 2005 summit outcome, we didn't have to renegotiate every detail of that. Now, none of that is guaranteed. We need a recommitment. We need an insertion of the normative and mandate positions of the International Human Rights Program. It looks like the level of commitment has slid very significantly, and that needs to be addressed. Political summits are made for that, and we should certainly take advantage. Yes, and on the special procedures, the human rights mechanisms, the universal periodic review. But also, I wonder what happened to the idea when the Human Rights Council was created, of the Human Rights Council being an actual council, like the Security Council, the Economic and Social Council. In other words, a 3-pillar structure with the authority of a council. And so while all of these mechanisms that we rely upon do deserve the attention that you've given to them, I wonder about the council itself. Yes to children and youth, which it seems to me is long overdue in having the intimate engagement of their voices in what the UN does. And also, we have to ask what's happened to the commitment in an aging society globally of the Organization to the Human Rights of Older Persons, when it's been more than a decade that negotiations have been ongoing on the Declaration on the Rights of the Human Rights of Older, Convention on the Rights of Older Persons. And more than 10 years ago, we presented reports demonstrating a very clear need, and yet we had no movement on that as well. Inequalities, including economic inequalities, all inequalities across the board. The organization is very far beyond on that, and that impacts on so many groups that don't see themselves as constituencies of the United Nations, but need to if the organization is going to survive. Yes, on increasing the number of staff with human rights knowledge and education and experience, but also, and you use the word mainstreaming, I agree with you. That needs to be taken a little bit further. There are institutions within the UN system that have simply said no to human rights.
international financial institutions that claim an exemption from integrating human rights in their work. And without a mobilization from civil society, that is not going to change. And then finally, on how civil society reacts to ECOSOC and to the broader UN system, I mean, this is a really important track in your work, and it does belong here as well in the human rights side. I have to say there is something, and again, with apologies to the member states, the ECOSOC committee, NGO committee, is the second most dysfunctional intergovernmental body in the UN system after the Security Council, if I may say so. And it's because the paradigm has outlived its usefulness. It's the idea that the member states should be governing the participation of civil society organizations is a very old-fashioned idea. Where are the models for self-governance? The ECOSOC gives status to organizations, gongos and bongos and anti-human rights and anti-peace groups, and they get accredited. Bona fide human rights groups can't get accredited. And the vast majority of civil society representatives, human rights defenders, have never heard of ECOSOC. So it's irrelevant to most of them. Any modern system would relate more on the kinds of principles that you've articulated of self-governance, including dealing with the gongos and the bongos and all those other sorts of things, and making sure that there is access for those who seriously are committed to the goals of human rights, peace, equality, environmental sustainability, and development.
Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to Ishan. I know that you've done a lot of work on the human rights charity recently, and we have also Jivika and others in the audience who have been participating actively to that track. So thank you all so much. And thank you both for taking the time to have this discussion with us.
Thank you.
So I welcome you back to your seats, and then we'll bring on the environmental governance track. So could we please have Lauren Banham and John Blasto and Dr. Arunabha Ghosh, the CEO of the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and also Commissioner for the Water Commission. And so we'll be very busy in your coming days. But Lauren, over to you to kick us off.
I think Lauren is being played by John.
Yeah. Right, okay.
They're very flexible.
Push that green button.
Yep.
Got it. Thank you. Good. Okay. So even the UN knows that the UN is not fit for purpose. It hasn't saved us from the scourge of war. And in the face of current global challenges, such as environmental degradation and artificial intelligence, which weren't even conceived when the UN was established, there is nobody charged with delivering the common good of humanity. The UN does not serve we, the people. There is widespread recognition that profound change is needed, but no one knows exactly how this will come about. We're in a crisis, and as Milton Friedman said, when crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around. That, I believe, is our basic function, to develop alternatives to existing policies, to keep them alive and available until the politically impossible becomes the politically inevitable. So this then is our task at the Global Futures Forum: to develop a comprehensive plan for effective, just, and accountable global governance serving the common good of humanity. So here is that plan from the Environmental Governance Track. The mega project is a comprehensive set of global governance reforms, both quick wins and profound change, including financing mechanisms and, critically, an implementation mechanism with a proven track record, and, acknowledging that Richard Ponzio got there first, a smart coalition of state and non-state actors supported by public awareness raising through transformative education. So in the mega project, the quick wins include the extraordinary campaign to add ecocide to the Rome Statute, and acknowledging Anna Madrick, who's in the room, hot off the press, thanks to her. This morning, the jury committee of the European Parliament unanimously supported adding ecocide to the European Crime Directive. So we're already making progress. The final hurdle is the vote of the European Parliament itself, and that is next month. Another quick win. Expanding jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice with the end goal of universal jurisdiction. And referencing the emergency platform. It should be deployed now. I talked to the scientists, we are in a planetary boundary emergency right now. Deploy the emergency platform, mobilize actors in the international system as soon as possible to deliver on the Paris Agreement and protect all planetary boundaries. And then moving on to the profound change in the mega project. We need to create an empowered global environmental organization to legislate, to protect planetary boundaries. Advised by an integrated scientific body, working with a world parliamentary body inclusive of youth, women, indigenous voices, everybody. Deliberating and legislating in the common interest of humanity to ensure the accountability and legitimacy that current global governance so sorely lacks. Supported by transformative education, on which I will hand over to Lauren.
Yeah, so we know that education as it is at the moment is not working to teach young people without the triple planetary threats. And realistically, we want to talk about how environmental governance links in with all the other tracks. Realistically, educating young people on how to deal with on these issues is essential in order to move forward. So yeah, these issues will define their future, and education is currently failing to teach them about it. And we need creative, innovative education that lasts a lifetime. That educates on the triple planetary effects. To go ahead and talk about the interlinkages. I could sit here and talk to you for hours about how women experience climate displacement unequal to men, but I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to talk about three words that I've used a lot recently. So accountability, participation, and deliberation. All of the different tracks we've talked about, I think I've mentioned different terms of accountability and transparency. What we're doing here in participation is absolutely essential to moving forward in environmental governance and deliberation. So moving forward, realistically, the fantastic work that we've done here on the People's Pact could simply be ignored. And if the SDG Summit does not deliver for the G77 this year, the Summit of the Future might not even happen as we've imagined it. But regardless of this, the process that we've been involved in the GFF is absolutely necessary, because consulting civil society, particularly for environmental governance and climate justice, is so essential, because as we've seen, the reality has not delivered. So the next steps that we want to really focus on are translating this process from the GFF into action by creating a smart coalition, the state and non-state actors that have historically achieved real change, because this is essential for environmental governance, supported by the shift for the current public narrative of apathy through transformative education. So Peace Child International is hoping to work with Generation Unlimited of UNICEF to provide accessible and accurate decolonised information put together by young people for young people. Yeah, you got finish off. All right, no worries. Okay,
So loyal.
okay, fine. Let's go.
Young people follow instructions
Most of the time. So people on the ground who are facing the brunt of climate change are not interested in sitting around and talking about global institutional change. They're interested in their problems being solved. We know that we have the solutions to these problems. So let's allow ourselves to, instead of worrying about what it would look like if we don't change, if we don't follow these solutions, if we don't change anything, let's allow ourselves to imagine what the world would look like if we did follow this change.
Just picking up from where Lauren left off, first of all, many thanks for having me as to respond to these really rich set of recommendations and mine. Thanks also to my colleague Nandini who's been part of actually engaging much more deeply with these consultations for the past few weeks. But just picking up where you left off, Lauren, there's this cartoon I saw a few years ago about these business executives and someone saying, what if all this climate science were all wrong and, this was all a hoax and we just cleaned up the air and cleaned up the water and cleaned up the energy system all for nothing, and in a way, it just describes to us why we're so disconnected from these rich recommendations that we have and don't actually ask ourselves that very question you asked, what if we did do it? So my overall sense about these recommendations is that while they're rich, and I'm going to be intentionally a little provocative, while they're rich and well thought through, they are quite top down. And I worry that when we leave from here within the sort of 200 square meters of this building, when we leave from here and go back to our home countries and go back to the ground, how much of this will get discounted and diluted by the time it reaches? So the people. So the question I had in mind is, where is the democratic demand for these proposals? Not that you've not followed a democratic process in getting to the proposals, but where's the democratic demand? And I think this is where the transformative education recommendation is, in my mind, the number one recommendation, because it is an a priori step to getting to that democratic demand. Especially the role of youth. I was just thinking, yes, we're talking about the sum of the future, but imagine the centenary of the United Nations, 2045. Someone entering the workforce today as a young person will be in their advanced career in 2045. So what you do now is fundamental. How you educate that person, how that person then educates their child, etc., to get to where we want to. But there are two more E's in addition to the education that will be needed, in my opinion, to create that democratic demand. The second E is empathy, and the third E is empowerment. I think you mentioned, Lauren, or someone else, about apathy. I think that is the lack of empathy is the biggest crisis we're facing in the world today. It's an even bigger crisis than climate change. And it doesn't happen unless we walk in the shoes of the vulnerable. And equally, no matter how rich the recommendations, if someone feels disempowered to actually enact them, then it is something they're receiving. They are the objects of our goodwill rather than the subjects of the actions that we want them to take. So education, empathy, and empowerment really would be necessary to get you to creating this democratic demand. Very quickly, a few other thoughts. We've got 1 minute. On the decarbonization agenda, which I feel is very important, and equally on this whole issue of the Global Environment Agency that John, you were referring to. See, often say if you're a poor person, you end up not going to the doctor, not because the medical service might not be available, but you worry, what if you got to know something really bad about you and then you don't have the resources to look after yourself? I use that analogy because the decarbonization agenda loses meaning if we don't have resources. The science loses meaning if we don't have resources. This is why we ignore the science. Because we are worried it will tell us things are really bad, and then I will be even more exposed to my lack of resources and my lack of empowerment to do anything about it. And therefore, I know, Nodara, you're going to shut me off any second. Therefore, please, let's think about how to mobilize the resources at scale. I've heard a lot about the role of civil society, but I haven't heard enough about the role of resources provided by big business and resources needed by small business. Because the small business are the ones that employ people. And for Global Environment Agency, its primary role, I believe, should not be about legislation. It's about holding countries accountable. Let me stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aradava. And we do, just to say, a couple groups now have brought up resources, so no pressure to the Global Economics and Financial Architecture group. They'll come a little bit later. But I do want to, what you mentioned, sort of circle back to something that was mentioned at our intergenerational plenary by Francis. You know, the younger generations of today become the older generations of tomorrow. The youth of yesterday are the older generations of today. They're just youth alumni. So I really think it is about that knowledge transfer, that sharing. So thank you so much for emphasizing that. Dan, who's coming next?
So next we hear from the Global Digital Compact. We have Ritika Singh, who's a program manager for global programs at the Center for International Private Enterprise. She's coming on up. And then in terms of respondents, we have Loka Banerjee, who I just realized she was sitting next to Chantalin Carpentier. Very sweet moments. They've been sitting next to each other for 30 minutes and then looked at each other and realized it and gave each other a wonderful hug. It was very nice. Loka is the director of the Civil Society Division and executive coordinator for Generation Equality and Women. And then we have Deborah Welsh, who's actually joining us online, I would imagine, from Australia. She's the executive manager of international strategy and futures at the Australian E-Safety Commission. So we are looking forward to hearing from her as well as others. Thank you so much for staying up at what I can only imagine is not a wonderful hour. So we'll turn now to Ritika. Feedback.
Thank you so much, Dan. Yep. Great. Thank you so much, Dan and Nadara. And thank you to those of you in the room and online that joined the discussions on the Global Digital Compact yesterday and today. We had very active participation and many different interventions on lots of different topics pertaining to this, and we easily could have gone for twice the amount of time. So I will very quickly outline some of the recommendations and how we, some of the things that we talked about in terms of moving forward. I'll try and keep it brief, but basically we had 4 that we elaborated on over the course of the last 2 days. So first, we said to build on existing UN initiatives. There was a lot of agreement among the people that were commenting that we really don't need to reinvent the wheel, and we should build on existing UN initiatives in order to move forward. So one was to support the work of the UN Tech Envoy in coordinating across the public and private sectors and civil society on the Global Digital Compact development and implementation. Then next, advance the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation through transparent multi-stakeholder dialogues. Third, leverage the UN Internet Governance Forum, or IGF, exploring an IGF plus model, regional national IGFs for enhanced bottom-up stakeholder inclusion and global digital cooperation. And then last, any other relevant existing UN entities, such as the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, Coalition for Digital Environmental Sustainability, and others. So we still need to kind of flesh out how to meaningfully incorporate how to meaningfully support these existing UN bodies and incorporate the diverse inputs into the compact. But there was broad agreement about this point. Then the next recommendation was to empower individuals by democratizing the internet, to treat the internet as a global public good, then to seek synergies with the new Agenda for Peace, another proposed theme in the Secretary General's report on our common agenda, in areas such as global cyber threats. And then lastly, to provide a multi-stakeholder forum on the governance of AI and other emerging technologies. This was a big point that came up, and many different people talked about the various complications and complex issues around AI, of course. And basically, we agreed to mitigate the risks of their potential negative impact on freedoms and livelihoods and security. We need to leverage existing UNESCO and OECD AI principles. The next recommendation was protect human rights and privacy online. In order to do this, we would apply existing standards, such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so particularly applicable are Article 12 on privacy and Article 19 on freedom of expression, and the UN guiding principles on business and human rights in the digital space. Then we also wanted to leverage the UN Human Rights Council's prior work on rights online and approach the protection of rights from a gender lens, being mindful of the needs of marginalized communities, youth, and children. And lastly, for the final recommendation, we had close the digital divide within and between countries. What this looks like is set and pursue ambitious targets for universal connectivity by 2030. And we also talked about how to really prevent internet disruptions and shutdowns. So I'll stop here, but I would just say a quick thanks to my co-leads on this track, Anna Kompanek, Muzna Siddiqui, and Vanda Proskova. We do have a lot of work ahead, and we look forward to deepening and finalizing these recommendations with you in the coming months. We got a lot of great ideas, and people even sent specific language that we can incorporate. So please do see me or reach out to me by email, and I can share the document in which we're collaborating in order to make sure we capture your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rita. And thank you very much for this great conversations that you have been having for the last couple of days, and the really important recommendations that will come through from here. So I will also follow Craig's advice and say "and." So thank you. So "and" to in addition, I do want to highlight one big issue as we go forward, building on what you said on building on UN initiatives that already exist. The biggest UN initiative that we've just had on this topic has been the CSW that has just been concluded, which is talking about gender and technology and technological innovation. So what I wanted to talk about is the critical importance of looking at this set of recommendations around the Global Digital Compact as one of the central pieces of it addressing the gender digital divide. So you talked about the closing the digital divide, but within and between countries, absolutely. But the biggest divide is the gender digital divide. It affects digital equity. It affects digital cooperation. It affects gender technology design. It has implications across a range of the recommendations that you're making around this. It's also, I think, very, very important to look at the framing around AI that you were talking about, because yes, absolutely, to look at to look at a sort of a moral code of ethics, but to go beyond the more ethical reflections and to adopt a human rights-based approach as a standard in the financing, design, development, deployment, and of AI, because it's I'm going to actually cite one of the most striking statistics around this. In AI as of right now, only 22% of artificial intelligence workers globally are women, and in a series of studies that were done across all of the member states of the United Nations, there was more than 45% of AI work has both gender bias as well as racial bias. And this is absolutely critical as we go forward to look at these recommendations. So the one key focus that I would say that would be really important as going forward for the Global Digital Compact is, yes, democratizing the internet, but recognizing that democratization means looking at a gender responsive framing of that democratization, because actually the internet is democratic. The point is it working in support of equality? Equality is the democracy working in support of equality and plurality and justice. And so to looking at democratization, but democratization alone will not address the focus of the internet as gender responsive public commons. And so that would need to be a central piece of the Global Digital Compact as it goes forward, because otherwise we will get into certainly some of the aspects around code of ethics, but we will not get into the human rights framing that is necessary for this to become a global public commons that supports democracy and peace. Thanks.
So now we want to turn to Deborah Welsh, who is somewhat blurry face. I think her face is actually blurry. And so we will hear from her. I just want to identify that the digital space is a new area. Maybe we can set a precedent having this conversation be by women. So many of the areas in which we're engaging by them. Maybe this one. We have female panelists.
We also have an entirely non-colleague.
Yes. So let's maybe follow us. Mental.
Thank you very much. And yes, I hope my face is not too blurry. Can you hear me?
Sorry, Deborah. Just 1 second.
Here.
We're all good.
Hang on, just one second.
Okay, Deborah, you're good to go.
Am I good to go? Can you hear me?
Not quite yet. I can hear you very lightly because I'm sitting right next to the speaker. And I heard you say you hear me. This is the commercial break.
Halfway through.
Can you hear me now? Is that better?
Is it playing through your computer? Stand on that.
Is that any better?
Yep.
Because we're echoing.
Okay.
We're still getting an echo.
Deborah, you might be on mute.
I'm not on mute on my side. I think people online can hear me. Is that right? Yeah. I think it might be something just in the room. I think in the room you're now on mute.
We're good now.
Deborah, could you try again?
Sorry, I only half heard that. I heard Deborah, could you try? You can hear me now? People online can still hear me? Success, great. All right, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak and be part of the Global Futures Forum discussion. As previously mentioned, my name is Deb Welsh and I'm the Executive Manager of International Strategy and Futures at the eSafety Commission. I'll be commenting largely on the thematic area of human rights and participation and the Global Digital Compact. But let me start by explaining the eSafety Commissioner, or eSafety as we're known, is Australia's online safety regulator and educator committed to helping Australians of all ages enjoy safer and more positive experiences online. We've been regulating online spaces for 8 years now and firmly believe we're at a global tipping point across society and industry where other governments are considering how to go about regulating the online space and, in essence, writing the next chapter of the digital world. Our hope is that the development of the UN Global Digital Compact will provide a critical moment for people across the globe to come together and clearly set out the expectations for a vibrant, rights-respecting online environment. This cannot be achieved by any one organisation or country. It must be global, multi-stakeholder effort across regulators, government, academia, civil society, and crucially, the tech companies themselves. We commend the inclusion of recommendations at the Global Futures Forum on protecting human rights online. As the world's first dedicated online safety regulator, we believe that a rights-based regulation must be based on the rule of law and democratic principles and values. While some rights-based frameworks in the digital environment have placed a narrow focus on particular rights, such as the right to freedom of expression and privacy, it is important that governments, civil society, and tech companies respect the interdependence of digital human rights and work together to build a holistic rights-respecting ecosystem. For example, we have seen time and time again that when online discourse veers into abuse, hatred, and violence, it can have a silencing effect on the person or group on the receiving end, which ultimately impinges on their fundamental freedom, right to freedom of expression and their rights to exist online free from such abuse. Ensuring online safety for all people and communities using digital spaces is often a precondition for digital inclusion and is key to closing the digital divide in a mindful manner. Research has shown that it's the groups with limited digital literacy and skills who are most at risk online, and that online harms can actively limit participation of many groups. So our response must address the interlinked issues of digital literacy and online safety. It's important for our work to be supported by education and digital inclusion measures to ensure that rights to equality, access, and participation of all communities are respected, protected, and fulfilled. Many groups in the community also have additional rights that must be protected, including children, women, people with disability, and racially marginalised groups, in order to fully enable these groups to access and participate in the digital space. Empowering individuals and democratising the internet is another important recommendation that has been raised through the Global Digital Compact theme. In our model at eSafety, individual complaint schemes are one aspect that we do this through. Through our schemes, eSafety acts as a safety net, helping to bridge the power imbalance between an individual user and the big tech platform. We need to see tech platforms step up to fulfil their corporate responsibility to respect individual rights of users. We know that this is what the public wants too. A recent survey that we conducted showed that 84% of Australians, adults, think tech companies have a responsibility for their online safety. Through our Safety by Design initiative, we've been working with industry for the past 4 years to fundamentally change the way they design and develop their products, with user safety at the core. So with this in mind, I ask you to consider, how can the Global Digital Compact address the power imbalance between individual users and big tech platforms? How can users be empowered, but how can we ensure that tech companies are also doing their part? How can we meaningfully raise the bar when it comes to protecting human rights online? And how can we translate high-level principles into action? Thank you again for the opportunity to contribute to this important discussion, and we look forward to your work on the People's Pact for the Future to develop futures we want and United Nations that we need. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much,
Deborah.
Deborah.
And I will say it's almost ironic that the digital governance track is the one where I have the most issues. But I do appreciate your patience and your early morning rise. I do also thank Banerjee for taking join us and really showing us that digital governance is going beyond just the face of it all and the tech issues, but really the human rights. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, no, it's me again. Okay. So it's now my pleasure, and with no pressure at all, because every conversation has gone back to resourcing, to introduce the Global Economic and Financial Architecture track. As a respondent and a summarizer, we'll have Professor Edna Ramirez-Robles from the University of, oh my goodness.
Guadalajara.
Thank you, Law School in Mexico. And we'll have a representative of the Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the UN, and Chantal Line-Carpenter from UNCTAD, New York, for the Office of the Director. Chantal, over to you.
No, it's Edna first.
Yes, no, I mean,
Over
to come over to the panel, and then Edna, over to you.
And it's my turn?
Yes, it's you.
Okay, thank you very much. I will repeat my name and my last name and my affiliation. No, I'm Edna, yes, from Mexico, Universidad de Guadalajara. And yeah, basically I am here with a very limited time, but okay, I will do my best. In our area, we identify 5 main aspects. So first of all, the corruption, the multilateral trade, the tax systems, and the use of G20 Summit for Green Development and Economic Recovery, and also the IMF special drawing rights, the SDRs. So these are the main areas, and we identify some issues for each one of these areas and obviously recommendations for them. So in terms of the corruption, there are high-level corruption cases, and the national jurisdictions have been unable or unwilling to prosecute. So the recommendation in our team is to establish an international anti-corruption court to tackle corruption and illicit financial flows. Also, the court should have the power to recover and repatriate these assets and to use them for development and humanitarian projects to avoid returning funds to other corrupt officials. So in the area of the multilateral trade, there have been, we all have lived this trade wars between United States, China, and many other countries. And they have many of the WTO members, the World Trade Organization members, are in breach of their obligations, despite that there is like a system, right? A dispute settlement system there, although not doesn't function properly. But there is also a lack of or an insufficient inclusion of certain stakeholders and certain actors at the table, right? So either to take decisions or to consult. So this, the proposal here is like to strengthen, since there is a crisis in the dispute settlement mechanism at the established stage, then there is it has been tough to find the agreement of specific important actors such as United States to strengthening again and make it binding again. So then their proposal was to strengthen another figure that already exists, that are the National Trade Facilitation Committees, and to include more of the stakeholders that already participate. This existing committees are normally composed by the private sector and the public sector representatives, and the proposal is to include other stakeholders, starting by the private sector, such as certain associations or services providers that normally, or women traders or MSMEs, that are not normally or naturally included in this national trade facilitation committees, also to include academia that will help as think tanks, or also to provide qualitative or quantitative research. And also they can also NGOs is important for specific topics such as climate change, women and trade, etc. Right? So these are, and consumer associations as well. They can create and be the ideal link to have a dialogue between all the different stakeholders, the public sector, private sector, and also the consumer associations. So also that will lead us to greater transparency, and this greater transparency will allow to hopefully have or establish more consequences, right? So the third aspect, tax systems, there are recommendations because of this inequality continues to skyrocket, and the adverse impacts are unfair in the tax systems. Then proposals for taxes targeting the richest are increasingly popular, and also tax currency transfers, airline ticket purchases, and other transnational services, and also mobilize public finance and leveraging private finance for critical public goods. And then also this is the favorite of Richard, to use the G20 summit for green development and economic recovery. And this because many countries are underrepresented when it comes to this G20, and the UN does not have the same capacity as the IMF or the World Bank to monitor the financial decisions of the economics dominating the G20. So then the proposal is a biannual summit with world leaders at the UN headquarters that coincides with the UN General Assembly to create worldwide participation in discussions on economic green development. And last but not least, the IMF special drawing rights. The proposal is to expand the IMF's SDRs as means for debt relief and financing critical global public goods, giving the IMF the capacity to quickly access new funds under a more streamlined approach would improve the flexibility, the ability to respond to global events, and also the currency sustainable standards. There was a proposal actually today to use the currency as an incentive or disincentive when countries address inequality or sustainability issues. Nice. Made it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Edna. And we'll now pass to Gloria Dakwa, Minister and representative from the Permanent Mission of Nigeria to the UN.
Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. I've just got in between meetings, so just check that it's on. Thank you very much. Well, speaking about anti-corruption for an international court to tackle corruption, let me start by just giving a little review about anti-corruption in my country. Of course, issue of corruption, let me just explain, is a very serious issue. And then the government in my country has an institution. Well, for years, there have been so many institutions to tackle corruption. And then the current institution now is the Economic and Financial Crime Commission, which tackles corruption both at home in Nigeria and for those illicit money that has been transferred outside the country. And I think what is very important for the institution is that the money that has been recovered so far, that has come back to the country, I think this is something that is very, very important. A lot of money that has gone out of the country that has been retrieved back to the country. And like she was talking, the money that has been recovered has been invested in so many things. Although we still have the issue of accountability, of course. We always have the issue of accountability, but I think that most of the money has been used to change the life of people, especially like there's a program that goes to the local community, and those money that was recovered like those ones who are in the local community, the villages, who never have probably had come to the city, these monies reach them because some of them have to get, even if it is just like $1 or $2. So those monies that were recovered actually touch the life of those people that are in the villages. So I think that it is quite a good thing for the recovery of illicit, especially money that has left the country. And another thing that has really that I think that it has helped us in this issue is that if you maybe you notice we're having the elections in Nigeria, and then we try to change the currency, and then even for those of us who are here, it was difficult for us to be able to get money. I think it's a way of helping to curtail corruption, to cut down the movement of money. So in other words, those who were trying to bring in money for elections didn't have the opportunity to bring that. So in essence, there was this issue of check and balancing to be able to find where the leakages is in terms of corruption. Probably when those who are bringing in money to buy votes, those who are helping, example, who are helping in election manipulation. So I think the EFCC, that is the institution, also stood very strongly in that. And then, on the issue of tax reform, we currency and Nigeria the other time with the issue of the start currency. I think it's something that we need to continue to discuss. Sorry. It's something that we Nigerians need to we have to keep discussing to see where we can go. We can continue. Well, anyway, let me start from here. Thank you very much.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see if I can wake up everybody here. Fun topic, I love it. International financial architecture, economics, that's the fun stuff. So I'm Chantal Capati, I'm with UNTAD. So of course, this is a topic that is of a lot of interest to me. So Edna did a good job, and I'm not going to be very creative. I'm going to use the same as Lopa and Craig and say yes, plus. And the plus are on corruption. I think it's very important. There's an attempt by some member states to limit illicit financial flows to only what's illegal. But it's not what's illegal that is the problem. It's the mispricing. It's the finagle that is done that is unethical because it's basically funnel the money out of the public sector. So that's very important. Please pay attention to that. The other one is on the multilateral trading system. We need a total reform of the multilateral trading system. I'm announcing it for those of you that haven't heard yet. I've actually got a promotion, going to Geneva, and I'm going to work on trade, environment, climate change, and sustainable development. And
not your leaving.
No, of course not.
Congratulations.
Of course not. You're going to miss me. Yeah. But I really think, and it used to be, I've been doing trade for 30 years. It's the first time in my whole career that we actually have a chance to change the trading system, to align it with the SDGs, to align it with climate change, with sustainable development. Because trade is a mean to achieve something, and now it's become an end itself. With what's happened now in the US and the EU, with the packages that have been put forward for during the pandemic, most of the rules have been broken. So can we basically just decide to relook at the whole thing and say what a multilateral trading system in support of climate change, sustainable development, people and planet would look like? And I think that's we should focus on that. The National Trade Facilitation Committee, definitely. I'm proud to support them, but they need to be more. And the people that need to be there are the micro, small, medium enterprises. Same with trade agreement. The multinational are represented at the table of negotiation for trade agreement, but not micro, small, medium enterprises that represent between 70 to 90% of the businesses. And about the same percentage of job and 50% of GDP. Why is it that they're not at the table? Especially women-owned companies. We need coalition of women-owned MSMEs that are at this table. because we need to empower women to have the money, the capacity, and the network to do their startups, because they tend to do startups that are answer their local problems. And these are what we're trying to do with the SDGs. On the G20, on the Tobin tax. Tobin tax, yes, but how do you ensure that the money actually go to where it needs to go and to support the people? I think that is the question. Once you get to manage to, but you can't do it in two parts. It needs to be done at the same time. Then the IMF SDR, totally agree. However, the problem is that with the inflation, developing countries, well, there's 69 countries now that are at the risk of are defaulting or at risk of defaulting on their debt. And pretty much their own fiscal space left after the COVID is basically going to service their debt. This is not acceptable if they're supposed to be financing their SDGs and climate adaptation. So what do we do about that? And half of the SDR that the a bit less than half the SDR they received during the pandemic actually went to just protect their currency against the increase in interest rate that the central banks of the world have been increasing. And basically, the US Fed model basically says that 1% increase in the Fed rate leads to 0.98% decrease in GDP in developing countries over 3 years. There's a direct impact, and yet the Fed doesn't have a mandate to look at the spin-off effect of their policies. So I think then we need to look at, and then just a few things since I got the 1 minute. Somebody mentioned earlier the private sector money. So they are companies have stranded asset that they won't repatriate because they don't want to pay taxes on them. Could we make a deal with them that they need to leave X% in that country and we're going to give them a tax break on that money if they repatriate it, but they invest it aligned with the SDGs, right? Or there's all these trillions of dollars in dormant accounts that people, we lost track. Who owns these accounts? They're sitting there in these banks. What can we reuse those to serve the greater good, the common good? And finally, we just published today the UN Network of Economists briefs on new economics for sustainable development that basically look not just at the green and the blue, but also the purple, which is the care economy, the yellow economy, which is what we talked about, the digital earlier, and the social and solidarity economy, the frugal economy. And all of those are a toolbox of new economics that already exist that we can actually use instead of the maximizing capital at all costs, when we actually know that we all committed to balancing capital, economics, environmental, and social. Can we look at those alternative economic model that try to do these three instead of increasing the trade-off between them?
So in case others have not had the benefit of listening to Chantaline before, I mean, all the presentations were excellent. I'm very grateful. But I just want to say, because Chantaline is leaving, I think May 1st, we are really going to miss you, miss that energy, miss that wisdom. And hopefully you can continue to be a sounding board as we're developing these ideas. Because in fact, that is the purpose of this session, is to present ideas to those with specific intelligence and knowledge and experience, so we get the feedback. So critical and yes ands and all of this are most welcome. So thank you so much for setting that example. And we have our last panel coming up now. We have Vandra Koskova, who's a co-convener for Youth Fusion, who will present on the peace and security track. And then Dr. Adam Dave will return. And then Hank Young Brinkman from the International Development Law Organization. And he's also an alum of the UN Peacebuilding Support Office. So I think he has a special expertise on this issue that we look forward to hearing from. Hello. Welcome back, Adam.
Good to be back. No more pattern jokes. Is there anything you have to do this twice today?
Fair.
Great, so the microphone is yours.
Do I start?
Tell us how it's done.
All right. Hello, everyone. I was sort of running in between two tracks, so I brought notes, so just bear with me. But basically, I'll just run over the 6 proposals that have really stood out throughout the process, and that was also consensus on. And I'll give you a short overview. For much more detailed reports and all the documentation, please visit Unfold Zero's website, which functions as a host of the Peace and Security track. You will find the final report there, but also all the specific reports, all the links, all the numbers. So highly recommend that. So proposal number 1, preventing war, including nuclear war, and strengthening international mechanism for the peaceful resolution of conflicts. This is sort of 3 subpoints. The UN Summit of the Future should affirm the inadmissibility of the threat or use of nuclear weapons. That's pretty straightforward. Secondly, all UN member states should accede to the compulsory jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice for disputes which are unable to be resolved through other peaceful means. Relevant. Thirdly, the UN Summit of the Future would reaffirm the mandate of the UN General Assembly to act in order to prevent or respond to acts of aggression when the Security Council fails to do so. Again, they're relevant. Proposal number 2, implementing Article 26 of the UN Charter through plans and action for disarmament to release resources for economic and social development. So coming back to the money aspect of things, this proposal basically calls on all states to implement this obligation through ratification of bilateral and multilateral arms control agreements, coupled with progressive and systematic reductions of military budgets, and also coupled with progressive and systematic reductions of military budgets. So basically taking money away from the militaries and then reinvesting them elsewhere where they could actually do some good. It's my favorite proposal. Proposal number 3, the United Nations Emergency Peace Service. This proposal calls for the establishment of a new agency, which would be permanent. It'll be a force of approximately, the proposal said 13,000 professionals to be available for immediate deployment in crises, and they would be authorized by the UN Security Council. Halfway there, bear with me. Number 4, including nuclear abolition in the post-2030 Sustainable Development Goals, with the goal of complete elimination of nuclear weapons by 2045, which is, as we all know, the 100th anniversary of the United Nations. This proposal argues that the elimination of nuclear weapons is a political imperative to protect current and future generations from the possibility of a really catastrophic nuclear war. In other words, there is no truly sustainable world without the realization of a world without nuclear weapons. I think that's very straightforward. And we can move over to number 5. Advancing the human rights to peace, nuclear abolition, and climate protection in the ICJ and Human Rights Council. 2 subpoints that I would like to mention here. The Human Rights Council should take an action whenever a UN member causes serious violations of the human rights to peace. And then secondly, is a suggestion that UN member states and UN human rights bodies should engage in the case being just now, initiated in the International Court of Justice on Climate Change and Human Rights, and preparing to implement decision once it's rendered. Last but not least, eliminating Security Council veto and establishing 3 additional security councils on peace building, climate security, and health security. This proposal is very detailed, so again, please read through it on the website. Basically calls for the establishment of 3 new UN bodies or the councils, and then it explores the objectives, the mandates, and the governments for these councils that would find acceptance by a majority of UN members. From my perspective as a young person in the field, and also an optimist, I found all of these proposals absolutely terrific, hopefully also realistic. Something that was also noted during the past 2 days was that all of these proposals had a positive peace aspect, so it wasn't just about the negative peace and the absence of conflict or its resolution, but also, about the positive aspects of peace and the fact that peace really benefits harmonious, positive, and rewarding relationships between everyone. And it also very much showcases how these proposals would directly benefit the proposals put forward by the other tracks. So here's to making them happen. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you also all for such engaging conversations, not just in the tracks, but also in the halls and over sandwiches. The energy has been absolutely contagious, so it's been a pleasure to be here. And again, this was very quick, so for all the detailed proposals, Unfilled Zero's websites, or of course, the forum's websites, it's all there. Thank you. Passing it along. Adam, do you want to jump?
We are just going to go down.
Rock, paper, scissors, and whoever.
We'll just go down the line.
Take care.
Okay.
Okay, I'll start. So no, that's great. It's always great to see brainstorming and coming up with new proposals, and certainly thinking out of the box is really what we need. I have a few questions, but also a few comments, and I think I will go, proposal by proposal. So, first of all, I think we really have been in a different kind of paradigm, in a different kind of world since 1989, and where crises, fragility has become much more to the fore. And I'm looking at all kinds of risks and crises, not only peace and security, but also financial crises, epidemics, all of that because of globalization and because of democratization. That makes connections among the world much easier and these problems to spread much faster. But what we also have seen since then is really an increase in civil wars, or the share of civil wars, I should say. There have been, of course, a huge decline in wars since the 1990s, the mid-1990s. Wars between countries almost completely disappeared. Of course, we were completely flabbergasted by what's happening in Ukraine and taken off guard by that. But my point here is that it's important to strengthen international mechanisms. I have no doubt about it. And recognition of the ICJ, strengthening of the role of the GA in peace and security are all good things. But prevention needs to happen at the national level. National ownership of prevention is absolutely critical. And we need to avoid international mechanisms. We need to avoid the need to use international mechanisms. So, in the report Pathways for Peace that the UN and the World Bank put together on prevention that I was involved in, we coined the term, prevention is sovereignty enhancing. So, one of the things that is often criticized is that prevention means intervention and it means, countervailing to sovereignty. But we have been saying, it needs to be a national responsibility. And if you are successful, you avoid international intervention. So you avoid the sovereignty undermining aspect. So I think that's really important. And in that regard, I think the SDGs and the 2030 agenda are absolutely critical because in so many of the drivers of violent conflict are in the socioeconomic area. So that I find that a little bit of a missing part in all of this discussion, the link with development. On the second comment, Article 26. I mean, it would be great if we can do that. But I'm also an optimist. I used to get paid for that, when I was a UN international civil servant, to be an optimist. But I think we probably need to be a little bit more realistic in that regard. So one thing that actually I at one point put in a report of the Secretary General is to tax the arms trade. Not that went very far, but I do think there are. Oh my goodness, there are only like 10 million big arms producers, so go after them. The veto initiative, very important. I totally agree with that. Article 27, that a party to a conflict needs to refrain from voting in the council. Russia should never have been able to veto any resolution on Ukraine. Third proposal, emergency peace service. Sure, I understand this completely. What is it different from, peace of, force, which of course has been the case. The proposal has existed in the past that didn't work. But I think coming back to your last point, the positive peace aspect and peace building is what we need to focus on. And that can be, part of the 13,000, which I hope are civilians and not military personnel. Next point, nuclear weapons. So that, I think, is a really problematic proposal because one of the most important decisions that the member states took very early on in the negotiations on the SDGs was it needs to be a universal agenda. And that was the problem with the Millennium Development Goals. So every single goal needs to be, applicable to every single country, of course, except oceans for landlocked countries. But So this is really important. There were only 8, I think, declared nuclear states, right? So that focus on those 8 countries. Final aspects, human rights. Very important. I think it's, of course, partly happening. But human rights, of course, has a lot of pushback, and it needs to be made concrete. So focus on really concrete things rather than saying, human rights is a principle. Focus on what in the Peace-Building Support Office, freedom of life, the right to live, a freedom of fear, voice, discrimination. Those are the really concrete things that we need to focus on. And I have to leave it here.
This is great, and yes, and all of that. I think these recommendations show how hard it is to come up with what the German PR said were bold and practical ideas in the peace and security space. I worked on the new agenda for peace language in the common agenda, and it was remarkable how constrained the feeling of space was to say anything on that. I think that this point about positive peace is a great starting point. I highly recommend the Institute for Economics and Peace work on this. It really tracks these trends around militarization that are the problematic starting point. I just want to, again, give a little sneak peek of what the high-level advisory board might be saying in this space, because I think it does address some of these issues in some ways. I think that the high-level advisory board's starting point was around the word effect. And the starting point is that security are effective, more legitimate through inclusion. It helps to generate trust through transparency, and if it's more nimble and responsive to emerging risks. And so those principles guided the board's recommendations around Security Council reform. There will be some recommendations there, including a reference to Article 109, so that's in here. And some of the ideas Vanda mentioned around the role of the other bodies like the GA and Human Rights Council as kind of sequential security piece. But I think also recommendations around including a large range of underrepresented regions in the Security Council. And I think the main point here is, I think we've reached a global tipping point. And if you look at the Bridgetown Initiative and some of the other initiatives in other spaces, there is a moment to insist that global governance have to be based on equity. And I think that there's a role for this group in trying to lock in that norm. I think that there's no reason that norm shouldn't apply in security space, even though it's harder to apply it there. And I think there's a really important role for smaller states and constellations of smaller states. I want to recognize the Present Future Institute, which is really leading some of those attempts to lock in some of these norms around equity. And I think that's a really important moment to recognize in peace and security. I think that those principles of legitimacy and transparency and nimbleness also led to the board's recommendations around more independent sources for measuring military threats. A multi-stakeholder transparency initiative is one of the recommendations that you'll be seeing in April. There is a more independent resource for tracking the threats from nuclear military weapons, which is kind of lacking right now. There's a lot of opacity in that. And I think also there's an interesting moment that Henk-Jan pointed to around the kind of universal approach to prevention. Prevention is not something that just belongs in conflict and fragile states. It's something that all states and all people have a responsibility to do. And I think the new agenda for peace discussions that are happening right now are quite exciting in that. And that could also lead to some of those shifts in funding that you're talking about. I think that ultimately the HLAB process, the high-level advisory board, really points to, in some areas, the need for less institutionalized approaches to emerging risks. It's very unlikely that AI risks, biological risks, climate risks are going to be managed through traditional forms of global governance. I think that thinking creatively about how networks of actors that can be mission driven around a common set of principles, and I'm interested to see some of that come up in the digital space, could be more effective. And certainly trying to find convergence between public and private actors around climate governance, biological risks, and AI in particular is probably more likely to get traction than thinking of a new institution. Not to say that some of those institutions you mentioned aren't important, but you might want to think about what function they're playing and see if there's a network of actors that could achieve that outcome without having to, for example, reopen the charter. Just a final personal, I got 1 minute. I can do 2 personal reflections at the end. I've followed the peace and security discussions pretty closely, and I think we have 2 blind spots. And the first blind spot that I didn't see addressed here, I didn't see addressed really in online consultations that the board did, and I don't see it in the new agenda for peace yet, is what I think is the biggest immediate risk to global stability, which is a state, non-state combined attack on critical infrastructure through cyber. And I think that there's a huge global governance gap around the threats that cyber attacks in digital space are there, and that the traditional forums like the First Committee are lagging too far behind this threat. And I do think a creative group like this could look at that more directly. The other blind spot is actually what I think Ukraine created, and that is this overriding focus on nuclear threats. It is an existential threat. It needs to be taken seriously. But looking at these recommendations, I'm not sure if 40% of our recommendations around global governance should be focused on nuclear per se. If you talk to African leaders, they see a much greater threat in small arms light weapons moving through illicit networks than nuclear. And I think that it is a fairly Western agenda that we see putting such an overriding focus on nuclear when much more could be done building a global strategy to deal with some of those illicit networks through which the global arms trade. I think Hank Young's proposal would pair very nicely with that about taxing it and maybe closing some of those tax loopholes. But I think that the people-centered approach that the board is taking really demands that we don't have an agenda that's just set by that moment that triggers a kind of knee-jerk response from the I don't like to call them the global north or the west, but the global minority. We need to be responding to the global majority. Thank you.
Thank you to our final set of panelists. This was a long 2 days, an important 2 days, and really, you know, despite all the efforts and potentially the sort of general quiet in the room, I think that everyone has really felt that electric energy throughout our conversation. We will now sort of just ask you to stretch in your seats because we'll move into a small vote of thanks. There's been a lot of people that volunteered their time and energy in this process. I know there are also comments and questions online, and I'm sure there are comments and questions in the room. So we're going to hear about, you know, we've been telling you all day and all of yesterday as well, this is an ongoing process. So what are the spaces that we're opening up to continue those comments and questions and recommendations headed into the future? So we're going to hear a little bit about that in this very final, very quick vote of thanks. So I'm going to invite Fergus Watt, our moderator. Thank you again for our panel. Fergus Watt, coordinator of Coalition for the UN We Need, will moderate this closing. Maher Nasser, UN Department of Global Communications Deputy Head, Queen Maher Nasser. Dan, please stay here as co-chair of Coalition for the UN We Need. Keisha Maguire, President and CEO of the Present and Future Institute. Becky Malay will be joining us online from the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. And our wonderful Maria Fernanda Espinosa, co-chair of Coalition for the UN We Need. Please.
A lot of people.
You're allowed to stand up, but not walk. You do the like the in place calisthenics.
There you go. Here. Yeah, further. But can you, no, we did. But Maria, soon after Maher, Maria needs to go because she needs to leave. So after Maher, we'll come to Maria and then.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah.
The list of people to thank, I'm not going to say anything.
Okay, so you get to say whatever you say about the meeting.
all this.
Yeah. Is this on?
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Okay, friends, can we return to our seats, please? Just we're in the home stretch. We're almost done, and it's been a hugely productive couple of days. So let's just finish with a bang here. My name's Fergus Watt, coordinator of C4UN, and it's my pleasure to moderate this last panel. We're going to start with the panelists have actually just been introduced to you by Nodara, and you have the program. I will say that our first speaker is no stranger to the campaign, and in fact, Maher Nasser is one of the best friends of the Coalition for the UN We Need. He wanted to bring his soccer balls and do a little juggling just to show off and do a promo for the Football for the Goals campaign, but he's we ruled that out. So Maher, you're on for your straight remarks now.
Thank you, Fergus. And good afternoon, everyone. And I think you're broadcasting good morning and maybe evening in other places of the world. I'd like to congratulate and thank all organizers and everybody involved in the Global Futures Forum, and for the opportunity to be engaged in it. It's my second day back from Hungary, so I'm very excited to actually have been able to be back and participate in the closing session. You put together a very impressive program, and usually when we as a department engage in the civil society conferences that we have organized, we are in the thick of it. And I'm very glad to see that we have actually been able to watch it on the side. But then you have also managed to bring a lot of energy, a lot of participation in the group, but I'm guessing also online, and engaged a lot of important stakeholders from member states. And then seeing the ambassadors and representatives who have participated in this program is very impressive. Of course, listening to the closing session and the feedback has more or less given me as if I have attended the first day yesterday. So that was very useful and very thought-provoking. And I want to be responding to other things that have already been responded to by the members of the either other colleagues from the UN or from member states. The Department of Global Communications continues the tradition of direct engagement with civil society organizations, academia, youth, and other stakeholders, as Fergus said, football and sports, soccer, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with you and everybody who shares the values that guide the work of the United Nations. The Summit of the Future is one of the 4 summits outlined in our Common Agenda report, which, as you have heard from USG Guy Ryder, conceived a set of ideas designed to turbocharge the SDGs. And I think when we look at the SDG reports year on and year off, we are way off track, and we have been pushed further off track by the pandemic, but also in Ukraine. As Secretary General Antonio Guterres, when he presented the report last week, I think, designed our common agenda was designed to strengthen, accelerate multilateral agreements, particularly the 2030 agenda, and make a tangible difference in people's lives. Our common agenda did not come out of a vacuum. It was also pointed out by USG Ryder yesterday. It was built on the 75th consultations when we started this discussions in 2020. Involved thought leaders, young thinkers, hundreds of civil society organizations, many of which are here today, all attending virtually. And that's where the our comes from. It's called our common agenda, not the United Nations common agenda. It's our, all of us. From the 11 policy briefs that are being prepared, the Global Digital Compact, from the Global Digital Compact to the new agenda for peace, the Code of Conduct and Integrity in Public Information, which our department has been tasked with preparing, and hopefully we'll be presenting a policy brief on that in May. We're keen to hear from you and to build on the previous processes and meaningful engagement. Engagement does not start here in New York. And I think this is something I've always said in our NGO meetings. And I think if you think that you can engage with member states only by engaging with permanent representatives here in New York, then you are mistaken. It is important, but engagement needs to also happen in capitals and the various levels, parliamentary levels. And I think some have already spoken about the importance of parliaments. Member states' deliberations can only be enriched by your views and those of academia, the private sector, youth, local and regional governments, and others. And I go back maybe one point on the private sector. And when we all think of climate change, carbon footprint, and Champagne spoke about economic money and all of that, where is the majority of money? Where and who stifles regulation that can promote green its private sector interests? And I think those need to also be factored in as civil society thinks about how do we make change. Change and regulation is important. We know that, and it is there, but sometimes regulation is fought most by those companies and those interests. So that needs to be one. When you think about the future, that cannot be discarded. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahar. Our next speaker, we're going to change the order in the agenda. And Maria is pressed to go to an urgent meeting, so we'll let her speak next. And over to you, Maria.
Thank
This one.
Thank you, Fergus. And I really apologize because I shouldn't be here because I have to run across the street and meet with the Secretary General at 5:30. But I just wanted to say one word. Thank you very, very much. These 2 days have been so energizing. It is so different. I know that there are many, many people connected and following, but the human energy here, the contact, the possibility to interact, to listen, to learn has been wonderful these 2 days. And basically, what I feel is that this is real and the movement is real and serious. This is serious stuff, what we're doing collectively. This co-creation of a better multilateral system, of a better UN. And basically what we're doing is constructively, creatively closing the gap between the desirable and the possible. And close the gap between our dreams and aspirations and real politics. And as I said yesterday, the time to do this is now. I have the feeling that it's now or never kind of moment, and that we have to make sure that we keep the level of engagement and we keep the level of energy, we keep the level of creativity and ambition throughout the coming years. And this is just the start. I know that we arrived here with a lot of homework that we did collectively on the thematic tracks, the consultations, the regional gatherings. So it's not that it's just coming out from the air, but it's really grounded in your intellect, in the movement itself. So we are called the Coalition for the UN We Need, but we are a movement to transform multilateralism. And we should remain this diverse, vibrant, representative, inclusive world movement for a better UN, for a more inclusive multilateral system. So there is a lot of homework ahead of us. On behalf of Dan is going to speak as well, but the coalition, just keep connected, keep engaged. It's just the beginning of a long road, and we count on you. We count on you, and your constituencies and the people you work with and the agents of change you interact with. And we want young voices. I have missed something here, and we need to fix that. I'm speaking to myself, to ourselves, but we are missing the voices of indigenous peoples here. I miss them because they bring a lot to the table. And I have also checked on how we're doing on intergenerational balance, and I think we're pretty okay on that front. And on gender balance, I think we're also okay on that front. So I'm extremely happy. And I hope that my first lines when I meet across the street with the Secretary General on water, I'll be able to say where I am coming from, and that he should really look at what we're doing collectively. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know that there is a long list of thank you to many of you, but thank you for what we are doing, and just let's look up to the future. And the future starts today, of course. So thank you.
Well, Maria, I think you can tell by the enthusiasm and the volume of the applause that everyone here, and not just me, really appreciates the leadership that you're providing for this movement. But you did say it's now or never, and you do have a meeting, so it will.
I got so happy that I think I'm just sitting there, so I'm sorry.
Come here.
Huh?
You can come over here and say.
Yeah, invite him over, send him a text, bring him over, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Thanks
Beth,
again.
I will see you tonight, hopefully, to
Yeah.
the ones attending the youth reception.
Yeah.
I don't qualify anymore, but.
All right, and Maria also referenced some homework. We do have a bit of work ahead of us tomorrow, and to give a brief briefing, if that's a word on what lies ahead tomorrow, is Dan.
None of my briefings are brief. I have 3 points that I will try to say quickly. The first is that a dear colleague in this room once said to me that we have to recognize that idealism is the new realism. And I think what she meant by that is that what is real is that the world as it stands cannot continue to be this way. And our ideals are the things that we have to pursue because it's a practical necessity. And I think all of us in this room recognize that necessity. And so I'm grateful to her for highlighting that to me many years ago. And for this group here, I think trying to build on that spirit together. So what are we going to do? The first thing that I think we will try to do actually starts tomorrow. And then tomorrow is hopefully a test run for what we will continue to do as we go back to our capitals and our homes. So tomorrow we have a mission engagement day, as we're calling it. And this is a day where we try to reach out, as the name would imply, to many of those UN missions who are here. Now, of course, it is the Water Summit at this time, and many missions are thinly stretched with the various ministers here. And we have still gotten maybe nearly 10% of the UN member states who have responded affirmatively, which may seem like not very many, but actually in this context, it's quite a few. So we have meetings at the Baha'i International Community's office, which you hopefully stopped by during your stay here. We'll be meeting there in the morning and then heading out to those mission engagements. I think many of you will have received your assignments. And if not, then I'm going to volunteer others to raise their hands to be the point people to go to. Jeff, you can raise your hand. You've been very engaged in this, and Richard has also been very engaged in this.
I think many of you have received emails.
Yes, so great. So that is the first thing, and this is sort of, if one imagines the human body, we have these blood cells that go out to our extremities, right? But they also go to the heart. So this a little bit is us coming together to the heart, but the point of going to the heart is to get the nutrients it needs from the lungs, the oxygen, so that it can deliver it to the rest of the body. So we're here getting our nourishment from the heart so that we can go back to our capitals, convince them that this is actually a really important thing to get engaged in, because I'll tell you, as someone who's New York based, so often when I meet with ambassadors and delegates, they say, well, it's up to capital. It's up to capital. Well, let's make capital tell them what needs to happen. So this mission engagement day should be sort of a practice run for what we should be doing with our capitals when we return. And then what will come next is hopefully a first draft of a People's Pact. Now, of course, we've been talking about these 7 tracks, but we all recognize that those are arbitrary kind of 7 pillars that we've been exploring. We have a couple of folks who will be trying to put together an initial draft of a People's Pact that is a working document that we will work on for hopefully a long time in the future to continue to refine it. We even heard today those first elements of refinement. That is to say, we make proposals, we hear feedback from member states, UN colleagues, and others with tremendous experience. We then go back and modify the proposals. And we can do this over and over again over the course of time, so that when the member states are finally fully on board with the Summit of the Future, everyone wants it, and then they say, oh, what does civil society say? We have the document prepared and we're not caught left-footed. So that's the plan for the coming months. Go to capitals, meet with people, and we will be working together collaboratively to create this initial thinking around the People's Pact. And please know that the C4UN door is always wide open for recommendations, ideas, critiques, constructive and hopefully positive, but that's not up to me. Because we really do see this as an opportunity to build a strong coalition together. And I think the participation here is testament to that. So I'll turn back to Fergus, and I look forward to the next steps with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And I think it's worth emphasizing that the People's Pact that Dan was talking about is indeed a framework. It's a perpetual work in progress, if we can call it that. It's something that Maria's fond of the word co-creating, and we're gonna be co-creating for months now, at the very least, until the Summit of the Future and probably beyond that. So hopefully we can continue to support each other and evolve something that's really quite special. Our next two speakers are going to deliver some proposals, some things that we've been working on with the C4UN. I'm going to turn first online to Becky Millay, who has been waiting patiently and sitting by that same window where she always joins our steering committee meetings. This is one of those times where you can't see the drapes blowing behind her, but usually you can. But Becky is a really just a stalwart for the coalition. And Becky, it's over to you you can say a little bit by way of introduction to GCAP as well, our key partner in this 3-year proposal for civil society assemblies at the UN. Do we have Becky?
Yes. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Great. Hi, my name is Becky Malay. I'm speaking from the Philippines. It is 5:35 a.m. in my country. So good morning to everybody. And I'd like to thank everyone. I have been monitoring what has been happening online, and I'm very happy to hear the very substantive proposals and recommendations that have come out. It's been a fruitful engagement with everybody. So thank you for that. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to introduce what GCAP is all about. If I may share my screen now. Can you see it? Okay, okay, great. Okay, GCAP is a global civil society movement. We're a campaigning platform. We have been doing campaigns on the MDGs from 2006. And now, of course, we have been involved in the SDG implementation campaigns. And our main themes are really focused on fighting poverty and inequality. And then GCAP members coordinate over 18,000 civil society organizations in 66 national coalitions. Now we have expanded from 58, and in constituency groups of women, youth, and socially excluded people. We have played a key role in the creation of Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. And we are present in many, many countries, as I said earlier, in 66 countries. In September 2019, we saw the need to organize a parallel People's Assembly, parallel to the UN General Assembly, with civil society networks as co-organizers. It was meant really to bring together people's representatives and civil society from around the world to give the grassroots voice into the General Assembly, at the SDG Summit. And then at that point, we had 300 participants from 80 countries where we agreed on a declaration. And in 2021 and 2022, we held online people's assemblies because of the pandemic, obviously. And then we had, at that time, 28 co-organizers, thousands of hours of online events, 1,300 participants from 127 countries. So somehow we have expanded. These are some pictures of the assembly held in the same space where you are now at the church center of the UN, which I miss so much now. The People's Assembly processes are actually bottom-up processes, no? They're organized at the local community, at the national level, at the regional level. Then we culminate with the Global People's Assembly. So it runs for about 3 days, no? Representatives of excluded groups meet in their communities to bring their demands to the National Assembly. Women, persons with disabilities, indigenous people, communities that are discriminated on the nature of their work and their descent are actually able to speak up and put their demand charter to the government. And then at the height of the COVID pandemic in 2020, our efforts have been confined to virtual, no? But we have grown. In 2020, we had 19 countries participating. In 2021, we had 26 countries. 2022, we had 28 countries holding their national assemblies. And in 2023, in September, we are planning for a modest number, 30 countries, no? 2 more. These are pictures of the national assemblies that were held everywhere, Pakistan, Philippines, and then some more. And then the next, we are planning for a Global People's Assembly before the SDG Summit. And then our preparations have actually started. And we are launching it at the end of March. GCAP is coordinating this with about 30 co-organizers. And so we are inviting everyone to join so that we can create a stronger voice, which will be heard by the heads of state, which will be heard by the heads of states in September. So that's it for my presentation. These are examples of what we have done last year. Pictures were actually shown at the UN General Assembly at some point in the UNGA last year. Okay, so from here, I just want to say that our starting point, we are actually barely recovering from the major setback from COVID. People have initiatives that are, everywhere. Everything is happening everywhere all at once. It's like an Oscar awarded movie. But this may be overwhelming, but we are well on our way. And all our hopes are in the coming SDG Summit, and then in 2024 at the Summit of the Future. So we're saying that we are very realistic. So we hope in spite of all these problems that are besetting us and setting us back all the more, we are still optimistic and we want to pursue all these multilateral initiatives so that we will have a stronger future for our children and grandchildren. So thank you very much and good morning. Have a good day.
told that you wanted to say a few words about environmental governance, as well as talking about a new initiative that we're working on together. Keisha, as your program indicates, is with the Present and Future Institute, and there are 4 other partners that are working with C4UN on an information clearinghouse function. So, Keisha, I don't know whether you want to speak about environmental governance first, or the bulletin and the clearinghouse, but you can decide.
Thank you, Fergus.
It works.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, let me say good afternoon to everybody. I just flew in today, but I had to be here. So I want to say thank you for the invitation. It really is a pleasure to be amongst everyone here. But let me maybe go with your first iteration of the order. I will first talk about, give a few reflections on the global environmental governance topic, which I understand was one of the sessions immediately preceding this one. So broadly and frankly speaking, and I think I'm sure you heard that, there's just a lot more to be done to advance work in this area. The rate at which we are seeing environmental devastation, and I come from, maybe you can tell from my accent, from a small island developing state, the Isle of Spice, Grenada, in the Caribbean. But honestly, the environmental devastation that we are seeing is testament to the fact that we do not have the adequate multilateral architecture to effectively address the issues. I also think that in the environmental and sustainable development space, our goal should be to foster more and greater cooperation and not work to advance approaches that drive wedges between countries and regions. Given this context, I think that there are a number of interesting and important ideas that have been proposed and are being mooted on what reforms we can take. Change, and I think no one argues this, is needed, but we can't change just for the sake of change. We must look to drive results. This must include ways to better improve the science policy interface across our work at the UN. It also means taking a whole of society and a global approach to building resilience and addressing climate change. This is at all levels of government, civil society, private sector, multilateral banks. All actors must work in concert. The last point I would raise, because I know I'm keeping us from the end of this, this day, is that finance is key. It underpins everything. And if it is mobilized, we can work to engage citizens and civil society to drive the changes we urgently need. So I thank you for allowing me to share those very brief thoughts. But now I will turn to what I think is a very exciting endeavor, and it's a bulletin. It's named the Information, what is it? Well, hold on, let me get that correct. The Summit of the Future Information Clearinghouse Bulletin. We have a few partners, and I will introduce them. We have Action for Sustainable Development, the Coalition for the UN We Need, the Global Governance Innovation Network, the International Development Law Organization, and my very own, the Present and Future Institute, PFI. The Information Clearinghouse Bulletin, in my humble opinion, is a critical resource for anyone interested in staying up to date on the latest developments related to the Summit of the Future and the Our Common Agenda report. It provides an overview of the most recent events relating to the preparatory process with hyperlinks to primary sources, making it an invaluable resource. And I can tell you, coming from a small country, and I used to be the ambassador of Grenada to the UN, that would be an invaluable resource. And it's, to small countries, small missions, civil society negotiators, and the general public. By providing a neutral, independent platform, the bulletin contributes to greater transparency and accountability in the Summit of the Future process, which is essential for building trust and promoting effective action on the SDGs and other important multilateral frameworks. Ultimately, our collective hope is that the bulletin will play a critical role in amplifying the voices and perspectives of all stakeholders, including civil society, and ensuring that the Summit of the Future and Our Common Agenda report truly reflect the needs and aspirations of people around the world. PFI is proud to stand alongside our partners on this project. It is well in line with our work to build consensus and drive implementation action on the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, and other important multilateral frameworks, while also working to ensure that future frameworks and actions are thoughtful and considerate of the views of all stakeholders, including the youth. This public launch of the bulletin here at the civil society-led Global Futures Forum is very much by design. It was kicked off last Tuesday, and in our opinion, and I think everyone shares it here, civil society engagement is critical to ensure that the Summit of the Future process is inclusive, transparent, and responsive to the needs and aspirations of the peoples and communities around the world. By bringing together diverse voices, experiences, and perspectives, civil society can help to identify shared goals and solutions, work with governments and the multilateral system to realize their commitments and drive action on the SDGs and other global challenges. The GFF continues to be a key platform for civil society engaged with the UN and with other stakeholders in the Summit of the Future process, and to advocate for a more just, sustainable, and resilient world. And with that, I thank you, and I encourage each and every one of you to make use of and freely share this very important resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Keisha. It's a bit of a cliche that information is power in politics, but it's also true. And I think with this tool we can effectively mobilize information for some of the to help build consensus around some of these. You know, we're custodians here of a very powerful set of ideas, as we've heard this afternoon, and through effectively using this tool and others as we engage in the Summit of the Future process, hopefully this can help us get some real results by September 2024. So, and I know that Jocelyn was involved online earlier. I don't know if he's still. It's the small hours of the morning in India, but he's our lead researcher and author of the first bulletin that you received in your C4UN mailer last Tuesday, and you'll be hearing more from Jebelson as the Summit of the Future process unfolds. So there's one last item on our agenda, and we are going to be on time for the reception, so please bear with me. I feel quite lucky to be able to have the mic for this agenda, and I'll try and do this expeditiously. But you know, good conferences don't just happen, and you know, good ideas don't work unless we do, and the work that went into this conference involved many people in many regions with numerous areas of expertise. So what I'd like to do is just to thank people who worked on the thematic discussions, and thank the people who worked on our regional consultations. Some of them are here, some of them are not here. And then we'll thank the organizers of the conference itself. And what I'd like to do is if you could not applaud after I read each name, but as I do read the names, I would ask those people to stand and be recognized by the room. I'll read them out, and as you hear your name, just stand up and wave or take a bow or juggle a soccer ball or whatever you wish. So starting with, these are the 7 thematic tracks that were presented earlier this afternoon. And we're starting with development. So our first, I know this first person is here because I'm sharing an apartment with them this week. Javier Sarasky, Georgios Kostakos is here. No, let's just in the interest of time, if we'll ask everyone to stand, and then we'll give them a hand. And Khalid Imam, Khalid. Digital governance.
Elliot Haber as well.
Okay, yeah. And Nudara knows the personalities better than I do and better than anyone in this room. So just keep jumping in to correct me. Anna Kamparak, Muzna Siddiqui, and Vanda Proskova from the digital governance track.
Yeah.
Environmental governance, David Wolcombe. Nande Harihar, Felipe Gallo.
Lauren Vanham. Yeah. Well, Robbie as well. Robbie.
Global economic and financial architecture. I feel like this is the Academy Awards or something. Camilla Tort, Brenda Mofia, and Richard Ponzio. You can take one of the chocolates for yourself, Richard. Human rights and civil society participation. Anya Mir, Ishan Shah, Jeffrey Huffines. Ishan gets one. Peace and security, Sophia Anton, Aline Burney, and Alan Ware. And I should say that Alan, if this was the Olympics, Alan would be the gold medal winner for how to conduct a global thematic a substantive dialogue. And Lily, yes, thank you, Lily. UN and Global Governance Innovation, Andreas Bummel, Veselin Popovsky, and Rhiannon Ye. And you there. All right, I'd like to turn now to recognize some people and who have been instrumental in the regional consultations. Most of these regional consultations have taken place. Some of them are imminent. And we hope that all of these regional consultations will not be one-offs and will continue as we move forward with our work. In the Asia Pacific region, there were 4 different distinct consultations. Denison Jayasuriya and Phyllis George led a consultation that was based, it was online, but based in Malaysia. They're not here. And Selmo Lee, with I think is known if there's a better known civil society actor in the world, I don't know who it is, and Selmo Lee once again led with the Pyeongchang Peace Forum, now called Pyeongchang Odaesan for Peace. Alan Ware also led a consultation on the Pacific Islands. And Becky Millay, who we just heard from, is going to be soon holding a side event at the regional SDGs forum. In the Latin American and Caribbean region, the key organizers, and I know they're here, so you can just stand up and wave. Javier Saraski and Renata Giuliotti, and Diego Masrur is also involved. Sorry, Rosario. I'm sorry. The MENA region is Khalid Imam is leading our consultations. Khalid, is he here?
He had to dip out.
Okay. The Africa consultations are, as you saw yesterday, we're working closely with the African Union's Economic, Social and Cultural Council, which is a formal body of the AU. It's an advisory body, but we're fortunate, and I think, you know, they're happy to be working with us, as you saw on the panel. Khalid Boudali and William Carew are here. If you heard from Khalid yesterday, I'm not sure if they're still here, but I know Oyebisi is here. Oyebisi, stand up. Oyebisi has led the consultation that took place on the 15th of March. Oyebisi is with the Nigerian network of NGOs, and his partners, his co-conspirators on that regional meeting were Nabil Moyo and Florence Siavuo, based in Kenya. And last but not least, the two leaders of the consultation in Europe, Georgios Kostakos and Nela Rakimova. Georgios, you get more chocolate, Georgios. This is good. All right, so there are a long list of organizers, and Nodara will correct me again as I if there are people who aren't on my list here, but there's about 15 of them, believe it or not. I mean, it's a big job putting a meeting like this together, and we owe a huge debt of thanks to this team. So I'm going to call out names, and please stand up and stay standing, and then we'd like to recognize you all as just in a moment. Maddie Peterson, where's Maddie? There you go. Hey, Maddie. Paramat Odebode. Paramat. There you go. Sophia Bermudez. Very good. Camilla.
Camilla Todd is joining online. Yeah, she's there.
There she is. Good. Tarika.
Tarika is also online in India. Truly global.
Yeah, as is Abby Jayan in India. Sayan.
In India.
Also in India. Viknesh.
Yep.
India. Okay.
They're our graphics team, so everything that you saw was my.
All right, and Jebelson, Jocelyn, I recognized a moment ago as working on our bulletin. Here's someone Monique Quierier, who's done so much to keep the online processes going, and well, I won't go on about how much I personally appreciate Monique, because we worked together for years. But Taylor, is Taylor here?
Online from Sydney.
Eliane was here a moment ago. Eliane. The person who compiled all our 2-page bulletins that were in our kits, Francesca Reynolds, back there, and Vanda Proskova. Hiya. Okay, so yeah, go ahead.
Sean has been incredible during this process. Yeah, and none of this would have happened without this incredible young organization. Thank you. Yeah.
All right, there are 2 more people that we would especially like to recognize. Renata Giuliotti is someone who is the face and the person behind the email that you've all been receiving from G Futures Forum. And Renata, it's someone who I've worked with closely on so many things. I can tell you that she is a reliable, just a dependable, well-organized, just a real rock and it's a very frantic, demanding job. I mean, we're a tough crowd to please. And Renata has told some of us about that more than once, but it's true, and we really appreciate what you've done, and this meeting wouldn't be what it is without you. So, finally, it's no surprise that the person we most want to recognize in the organization of this meeting is Nudara. Nudara Yusuf is Nudara had a vision for what this meeting could be and has become before any of us, and it's a tribute to her tremendous, her vision, her intellect. You've seen and heard how well spoken she is, it's really I don't know what else. There's so many things, so many times that Nudara saved our bacon as a meeting, as a program. She represents the organization. She does so much, and she really brings a kind of a vision to what the coalition is and is becoming. And Nudara, I think we're really grateful. Thank you. Nudara, do you want to say something?
Get me all emotional and then give me a mic. I do just also want to say thank you firstly also to Dan, who's been a partner in crime through all of this, the several calls that we've had and just said, Dan, what do you think of this? And we've sort of worked it out. Thank you so much, Dan. Thank you to Fergus, Jeff, Richard, for really believing in sort of the intergenerational capacity of this all. They said, Lara, tell us what you want us to do, which was just, it means a lot for the whole idea of intergenerational co-leadership, the whole idea of bringing people together. I will stop because I know it's been tired and I know I'm getting emotional, and I know we have a reception to go to, but I want to thank each and every one of you for just believing in this process, believing in us, believing in me, and being a part of it all. So thank you all.
All right, you want to do them? So that's pretty much it for this. As you heard from Dan, we'll see you bright and early tomorrow at the Baha'i International Community Office. We do have a reception to go to. The address.
866 UN Plaza.
It's a multi-permission.
866 UN Plaza. Very good. 5th floor. Yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah, same building, just over there. Thanks very much, everybody. We'll see you at the 7th.